Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video to keep you company if you need it. Another one of these videos which come out more or less on a monthly basis, where we just talk for a little while about whatever to keep you company if you're doing chores or trying to sleep or doing work, or if you generally just need some voices in your head to keep you company during the day. And once again, I am joined by Urukimania for a podcast style video. Hello, Uruk.
Hello, Scott Sword. Hello, everyone listening or watching. It's a pleasure to be back, as always.
Hey, it was great to have you back as always. I think you're just going to be a permanent co-host of this podcast now. I don't think we can go
Could
back to
be.
me doing it alone at this rate.
We'll see.
Well,
We'll see what the people say. I mean, maybe they're tired of me by now. I don't know. It's
we'll have
only
to see.
been 2 days since our last recording, so we have
That's
no
right.
feedback yet.
No, that's definitely true. Yeah, for people who are watching, maybe didn't see previous episodes, so just let you know what's happening. We're recording this third week of June, 2 days. I was gonna say 2 weeks. No, 2 days after the original or the previous podcast recording. I'm away over the summer, so I'm trying to get recordings banked up for you all, so you have things to look forward to. So yeah, we'll have to see. So yeah, if has been feedback on the previous episodes, we do appreciate it. We will have looked at it, but obviously we can't act upon it in this episode. But we'll have to see. Yeah, once I'm probably back in September after the summer, then we'll have to assess things and we'll see if how we continue into the autumn. Oh, sorry, into the fall.
That's right. Yeah,
I,
we can reevaluate. But
uh,
yeah, I mean, if people are okay with me just sort of jumping into the podcast partway through, then I don't mind sticking around. These are always a blast.
Absolutely. I mean, I think even if you're not, I think we'll just have to just keep meeting up on a regular basis to chat nonsense anyway, because it's really good fun.
Agreed. Yeah.
Uh, So yeah, more Stardew Valley for you. It's the final week of spring. So you see quite a lot of changes on the farm. We're going to transition into summer. If the podcast is long enough, you see the first couple of days of summer. Getting tools upgraded. I'm going to get a coop for the farm as well. So you're going to see that being built this episode. So that's what's happening. So yeah, obviously, we can't act on feedback from the previous podcast, but I do have a couple of quick I was going to say addendum. That's not right. Amendums? Is that the word, or have I got the wrong word? I wrote addendum in the
I don't.
thing. I think that's the wrong word
Yeah.
completely. Amendum, right?
Well, I think it's amendation or something like that. I don't think amendum sounds right either, but
Oh
I
my
don't know.
goodness. Two English
I
teachers
translate.
can't work out the noun from amend. Very good.
Yep.
Oh, it's funny. It says amendation, but it clearly says US English. Oh
Oh,
no.
that's so funny.
That's another one. So what's it?
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to have to now look at what
No,
addendum is. What is this thing?
no wonder amendation is what I thought of.
Ah, an addendum is just additional material that's added to the end of a
Yeah.
document.
Yeah.
Ah, it does
Addendum is
say
like a
to correct or
postscript. Yeah.
clarify. I do want
Ah,
to clarify a couple of things, so I guess that is right. Sort
there
of.
you go.
In a very roundabout sort of way, it's kind of right. So a couple of quick things I want to just point out. So this is something when I used to listen to Hello Internet, the other
Hmm.
podcast I mentioned with CGP Grey and Brady Heron, they had a Reddit page that was dedicated to the
Hmm.
podcast as well, and all the followers of the podcast who were called Tims used to comment on lots of different stuff. And it was always the way when after they finished recording a certain podcast episode, they would probably, I don't know if they spoke about it together or they thought about it separately, but they'd often think about what things did they say in the podcast that would have maybe caused a little bit of controversy or a little bit of debate in the Reddit or lots of comments. And it was always the thing they expected to cause lots of comments, nothing, like
Yeah, it
tumbleweed
never
blowing
did.
through.
Yeah.
But then the thing that was the
Yeah.
most innocuous comment, the smallest little thing, everyone piled in on it. We're talking
Yeah.
about it. So
That having run my own YouTube channel, that does not surprise me. I am like completely unable to determine what is not going to like resonate with viewers or be popular or interesting.
yeah, especially your style of video, right, where it's very much sort of educational. You're discussing certain things and you're having to give a lot of sort of analysis. Whereas me, I'm just rambling on about what I'm trying to play and trying to win the game and swearing most of the time. So yeah, it's not quite the
Yeah, but
same.
even then, I'm thinking of like on Strider's YouTube channel, he's been putting up a lot of Fury of Dracula games lately, and his sort of standard for viewership of a Fury of Dracula video is somewhere between 30 and 50 views,
Right.
and randomly, he just uploaded one that it was something like like an exciting start, something about how like things happened quickly at the beginning, and maybe because of that title, maybe not. It's very difficult to find out why. But for some reason, that one almost immediately got like 100 views and is sitting at like 120 to 130 right now.
Wow.
So, and then the next one got back down to like 30 to 50. Like, so it was like you get this sudden spike, and then all of a sudden it's back down to the regular range. And if anything, his latest videos have been slightly lower in terms of their view counts. But
So
I
you
mean,
need
they're also new, so
so you
that
need
confounds things.
so you need the clickbaity title then. That's what you're saying. The
Maybe
algorithm
it's the
wants.
title. That's the thing. You don't necessarily know what it was.
Mm.
It might have been the title. It might not have been. The title didn't strike me as particularly clickbaity, but
Hmm.
mm,
Yeah, because a lot of the videos that I've done recent, I mean, obviously, again, this is really bad because of timing and stuff. But in terms of the time of recording, a lot of the videos that I've done recently have been tournament games, and I don't
mhm,
put interesting titles for those games. I just literally say who's playing and that's it. So there's no like spoilers or whatever.
mhm.
But then for the friendly games I record, I put meme thumbnails and all that sort of thing. So it'd be interesting to see then what sort of things come up. Again, like as you say, the YouTube black box. We talked about it before, right? What makes certain videos popular, some not. I mean, even like my tournament videos, some of them blow up. I use the term loosely.
Mhm.
Over 150 views, and others are getting 40.
Yeah,
It's just like
that's what I
why?
mean. Is you get these unaccountable spikes, and
Yeah.
there's no way to make any sense of it. You're just sitting there. I like my last translation born video. I was convinced it was going to be like my worst performing video because I was just literally talking about like different articles of attire in a set, and I thought that was going to be like the most boring subject, and it's doing really, really well. It's like one of my best videos that I've come out with recently. It's got like really high metrics, and I was just like, I don't understand. Like, I'm proud of the episode. I'm happy it's been getting some exposure, but what's going on?
and
Just
just you
talking about the old Hunter set.
and just you wait until that podcast that we spoke about Translation Board 83 for about 2 hours comes out, because I've got the link for it in the description of that video in the comments. So you'll get even more views on it now.
Maybe. I don't know.
Um, so yeah, a couple of quick things to clarify, because it was again, I mean, it's also partly my fault, right? We recorded the last podcast very late my time, and I was very
Hmm.
tired. And sometimes, I mean, you know it that I mean, at the best of times, my mouth often moves quicker than my brain. And I say things, and then when I listen to it afterwards, I go, "Oh, that wasn't very nuanced at all, was it?" It's even worse when you're tired. And I haven't listened back fully to that previous podcast because I need to stitch it together. But again, kind of what you were saying, like you woke up in a cold sweat going, oh my goodness, I didn't explain pants and trousers properly.
Yeah.
It was the same thing. There were a couple of things I said, and I woke up and I was like, oh man, I did not phrase that very well at all. So the couple of very, very quick things were in the previous podcast, we had I don't know what moment it was in the podcast we kept having audio issues, and that kept breaking up things.
Yeah,
So
it
it was
didn't help either.
a very long recording session. But we were talking about COVID at one point, and and you also talking about the earthquake in Japan, and talking about how individual people and also society reacts to these sort of disasters or events, and then the way that people maybe my point was people nowadays are not looking out for each other so much, and like you saw it with all the panic buying of toilet paper and legumes and stuff in the supermarket. And yeah, we had a bit of a laugh about it, but I just wanted to make it like really clear, just in case someone comments. And if someone comments it, I will obviously write a proper comment. But I just want to make it on the record, orally, that there were a lot of people who were not, you know, selfish during COVID, and they were very, altruistic, and they were really helping out their neighbors. You hear lots of stories in my country of people, if they knew their neighbors were elderly and they couldn't go shopping, or they didn't want to risk going shopping, they would go shopping for them and leave the shopping on the doorstep for them and all this sort of thing. So I just want to make it really clear that a lot of people sacrifice a lot during COVID. I shouldn't tarnish everybody with this much going, oh, look at all of us. We're all so selfish and so, individualistic, right? That's not true. There are people who sacrifice a lot through COVID, and they
Yeah.
were helping out each other. Obviously, it goes without saying. Obviously, all the doctors and nurses and things, right, and all the key
Hmm.
workers as well. So I want to make that really clear. Off, I I don't want to make it seem like I believe that everyone was just in it for themselves. But there were people
Yeah.
who would take it to the extreme.
Yeah, and I'll second that, right? Because I was talking about in very general terms about like disaster responses, and I think that's just because of the expectations that had been ingrained in me versus my like lived experience with the earthquake and the tsunami.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think to a certain extent there would have been surprising and nice things if I had been in a natural disaster in other parts of the world too, right? That's
Yeah. Of
there's
course.
always people who are looking to help out and who are kind and caring and all
Yeah.
those sorts of things. So I will echo that sentiment.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And you're talking about it, I don't know if it was 2 podcasts ago or 3 podcasts ago, the fact that in schools, we're talking about the fact that in Japan, it's very common to wear masks if you're a little bit sick, and there's hand sanitizer, and you were saying initially when you saw it going, oh, I'm not going to use that hand sanitizer, I'm not going to put a mask on, then you suddenly, that mentality over time changed, you realize, oh, they're doing it for other people's benefit, and that sort of thing. Just
Yeah,
changing
yeah,
mentality a little bit.
like because I initially approached it like, oh, this is like a matter of culture, right? This is a matter of okay, it's normal in Japanese culture to take these precautions. It's not normal in mine, and we can reasonably differ on this. And I think after the first day or two of me being like, this is a matter of culture, like I can not like abide by these sort of regulations, I came to realize it's also a matter of health.
Hmm.
It's also a matter of some genuine concern. I should take care here, and sort of revised my approach. And then the funny thing is that sort of in turn gave me a new cultural expectation for when we had things like masking during COVID. It was like, okay, well, I've done this before, right? So that's
Right.
it sort of changed my perspective on that as a practice. And now, like my personal policy is, I'm just going to go with what I experienced in Japan, where like if I've got a respiratory infection of some kind, I'm just going to put on a mask because it just makes sense to me now.
Yeah. Well, that was
Which is
that's the
now
thing.
sort of now so that's sort of countercultural in the area where I am. But go ahead.
Right. Yeah, it's the same with me. Like when once the COVID pandemic sort of really sort of kicked in, we realized sort of the seriousness of it, and we're going to be locked down and everything. Um, I was kind of the same. I was then seeing the way that a lot of Asian cultures would always wear the mask and all this sort of thing to protect other people. They were being very conscientious about not spreading it to other people. But it doesn't matter if it's COVID or something else. So then I've done it as well. When since COVID, uh, if I get a little bit of a flu or a general cold, even if I don't know if it's COVID or not, depending on test availability or whatever, I would still always wear a mask. So I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
pass it on to the people I was working with. I didn't want to pass it on to the people I was coming in close quarters with. Um, and it was a very funny reaction again, where I was doing this thing that I thought was, well, I'm hoping I'm being just a kind human being. I'm not doing it for attention.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it because I think it's a generally nice thing to do, but also I'm just thinking about other people. I would like to
Mm-hmm.
hope that someone else would do it for me. And
Mm-hmm.
then the reaction of the people who I know were kind of like, "Oh my god!" And they thought I was like really contagious and stuff. Like, "Do you have COVID? Why are you wearing the mask?" I'm like, "No, I've just got a little bit of a cold. I'm just doing it so you don't get it." And they found that very very strange. And I was like, "Oh my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
we had a chance here to change our society and like do
Yeah.
something for the better, and it hasn't worked. Typical humans."
Yeah.
There you
Well,
go. I'm
it
generalizing again.
works. It's worked on an individual level, right, with us, and
Yeah,
maybe
of
over
course.
time that will spread. I don't know.
I doubt it.
I from
I don't think we're going to be trendsetters here, Rook. I don't
we
think
were
we're.
I don't think I'm going to be any trendsetter, but if we get enough individuals like us, that some of them could be trendsetters.
Well,
Like you were mentioning the last sort of disaster that was similar to the COVID pandemic being the 1920s flu that sort of
mm,
went all around the world,
yeah.
and um, the if I recall correctly, I listened to a podcast called the History of Japan podcast, which is fascinating in its ability to sort of cover both like specific topics in depth and just a wide variety of topics. And one of the topics that I seem to recall, and again, I hate relying on hazy recollections. I would much rather be able to like cite a source. So if I'm able to find this specific podcast, maybe I'll put a link in a document for you, Scottsword. But I recall hearing that it was in reaction to that 1920s flu epidemic that the people in Japan began wearing masks as a regular thing when
Oh
they
wow.
started to feel under the weather. So in a sense, like it's already happened, right? It's just that the lesson took hold in Japan, it didn't necessarily take part in other countries around the world. One of these times, who knows, maybe the lesson will take hold in other parts of the world too. And in
Yeah.
the meantime, I individually, like, it just makes sense to me. If I'm feeling under the weather and it makes sense for me to wear a mask, I'm just going to wear a mask because I
Right.
think that's just the conscientious thing to do at this point. But that's
Yeah.
just me. And that's, something about the way that I operate is I'll come up with all these sorts of things that I like to do, but I try not to impose those on other people. They can do what they want.
Yeah. Especially then eventually, you can't control other people, right? Everyone's just kind of they'll do it their own way. It's the same like for me. Like
Hmm.
I would do exactly the same because for me, wearing the mask isn't really. I don't find it much of a burden. I know there are
Right.
some people, and maybe some people might be watching this or not, but there's some people who really detested wearing the mask for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Maybe I don't know. It's very. I know it's like a lot of things. It gets very complicated because you don't know if it's like a legitimate sort of health discomfort thing that they generally find it hard to breathe. So I've heard people saying to me that they get headaches when they wear the mask. Again, I
Hmm.
don't know if that's true. It could well be true. I don't know if it's not because I'm not inside the other person, right? So I have no idea what they're feeling. But then also it could
Hmm.
be UK had it. I think most countries would have this, where there's also like political backlash to
Yeah.
restrictions and curfews and lockdowns. So then it might just be people just complaining about wearing a mask because they see it as being against civil liberty or however you want to frame it. And then it gets very political and whatever. Then it becomes very entrenched as always. So I don't know.
Right.
It's a tricky thing. But for me, I never found wearing the mask a burden.
Hmm.
Yeah, I did it primarily to protect myself, but also just in case if I can
Yep.
protect somebody else. Fortunately, I didn't have because my living situation there wasn't like I had sorry, what was I gonna say? Elderly relatives. There, I get the words around the right way. Elderly relatives that I had to visit, where I had to then really protect myself. I didn't have to do that because that
Hmm.
living situation didn't create that situation to happen. Um, but if I could protect somebody else, then okay. And it doesn't, as I said, it doesn't feel like a burden to me. But I know there'll be other people who disagree, and it'll be the worst thing for them to do.
Right. And then, similarly, so I live alone and I'm a freelance translator. So I like there can be very large swaths of time where I just never leave my house.
Mm.
And like the transition to lockdown was basically like nothing for me. It was
Well,
just
yeah, same with me.
I went
Yeah,
about my life the same as always. So like when I'm putting on a mask, right? It's like maybe once or twice a week when I'm going out to do something. People
right.
who had to wear masks much more regularly, particularly if they weren't wearing like masks that were designed to be comfortable, like that could be because I've bought masks where it's like after 20, 30 minutes it starts to like crimp my nose and it begins to
Mm,
become very uncomfortable, and the longer I wear it the worse it gets, and it starts to like like irritate the skin, right? I've since found masks that I think are more comfortable, more durable, better solutions for if I just happen to have a cold, I'm going to throw it on, and that makes sense. But it's my situation is not the typical situation where someone's going out and wearing a mask literally like 8 hours a day so that they can do their job or more, right?
right, right.
So it's not exactly an analogous situation. It's very easy for me to say, yeah, I'll just do this.
Sure. No, I agree with that. Yeah, especially when the pandemic started, because I was writing my PhD thesis, so I was already kind of a hermit inside my
Hmm.
parent-in-law's house, just writing anyway. So yeah, the lockdown didn't change anything for me in terms of how I operated, apart from the fact that suddenly then my wife was in the house as well, which obviously has its perks, has its advantages. But then we were suddenly then fighting over the same desk space and all this sort of stuff, right?
Hmm.
But which obviously we can now laugh about because we got through it and it was fine. It wasn't, compared to many other family situations, I can't complain. We had enough space. It wasn't like some people who were
Hmm.
literally then, having to work and their kids were also in the house, having to do studying online and goodness what else, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to complain. Our lockdown was relatively easy, but yeah, but then once then I transitioned into the work environment, and then once the way Spain kind of unlocked itself,
Hmm.
it very much was a case where then I'd be wearing the mask the majority of the day, depending on work patterns and stuff. I would have to wear it non-stop for about 6, 7 hours on the trot, just depending on what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just depends. So yeah, that was a that was quite a long discussion, just basically to say that not everybody was being selfish during COVID. I just want to make that really clear, just in case
Yes.
it causes a fury. And the other thing was the way we were talking about sort of public transport and sort of town design and stuff. I just want to make it really clear. Even though I was talking to you about the YouTube channel, not just bikes, that kind of complains a lot about the state of American and Canadian town design and public transport and lack of biking and stuff. I want to make it really clear that the UK is not this bastion, like this cycling heaven or anything. It is far from
Okay.
it. A lot of the old towns are not really well equipped to have bikes and cars on them. The streets are very narrow. There is, depending on where you live, there is good public transport. Like in Edinburgh, for example, the bus network is very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Cycling would be a lot more dangerous, I think, just because of the amount of traffic at times, and also because the road quality is not very good at all. Spain is also the same. Spain is not the best cycling country, and now they're starting to try to renovate and change the city designs, narrowing sort of the avenues and boulevards and things, and putting a lot more pedestrian and cycling space, which I agree with. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
then again, that's a political thing. People get riled up and go, "Oh, how dare they take away car space?" But eventually people will transition. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
as long as there are alternatives available in terms of good cycling routes which are safe, and also then a lot of public transport, people will transition. That's just natural.
Mm-hmm.
But in the moment where there's a lot of change, people get a bit riled up. But then obviously, if you go to other places in Europe, like Germany, especially the northern parts of Germany, and you're looking at like the Netherlands, that is a prime example of countries or regions where they very much they take cycling and public transport incredibly seriously, and a lot of the towns and regions are built around the bike, not the car. But even then, as something like not just bikes talks about, there are still quite a lot of controversial decisions which happen where they try to close streets to cars, and the motorist lobby start getting very riled up about it. And you get all the in the parliaments and things, you've got arguments going on about it. But I just want to make that really clear, just in case anybody's listening, going, "I've been to the UK, and the UK is shit for cycling and stuff." I completely agree. If you're going out to the countryside and doing long distance cycling, that's probably a different matter. There's lots of good views and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
especially in the north of Scotland, I'll advocate for Scotland as much as possible. Yeah, a lot of the towns are not really well designed for cyclists. And then, ironically, there are a couple of examples I've seen, looking up sort of city planning videos on YouTube and stuff, where you've got towns that were built over the last century or so, these new towns that have popped up, and they've been, designed by committee, right? Not like these historical towns like York or London or Manchester and Birmingham, where they've just naturally sprawled over time. They create a new town and they design it properly,
Mm-hmm.
and they create lots of cycleways and things. But because there is so much space for cars to drive, very few people actually bike, because traveling by
Mm-hmm.
car is so efficient. It's kind
Yeah.
of the reverse thing going on there. So those are the two things I wanted to make clear. I don't want people going, "What this idiot talking about?" Trying to make fun of America when the UK is not much better, to be honest.
I did check out, by the way, the latest two videos at the time of the recording, anyway, from Not Just Bikes,
Oh,
which,
brilliant!
funnily enough, turned out to be on uh, trains in Japan. So I
Oh,
was like,
really? Oh, I
oh,
haven't seen
this
them.
is
Oh, I've
this
been out of the
is
loop.
right up my alley. This is perfect.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, damn it. I didn't even realize. I think my YouTube algorithm's a little bit screwed. Because it it
Mm.
doesn't promote his channel to me anymore. I don't know why, even though I'm clearly subscribed
Yeah,
and stuff.
YouTube's algorithm is very weird. Like this sort of gets back a little bit to the black box we were talking about. Like
Yeah.
I know I've heard from people like on other YouTube channels that I follow where they're like, "Okay, I've subscribed to this channel, and even when I go to my subscriptions page, there it's still algorithm driven and it doesn't show people videos from the people they're subscribed to anymore."
Right.
And so it's just like even though you click that subscribe button, you're still not getting updates on their videos, and it's very frustrating. I imagine it's very frustrating both for the people who want to see those videos from the channels they subscribe to, and the people who have the channels and want those views.
Absolutely. So I just had a
I
quick.
always
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, and I've had a very quick look on my YouTube for not just bikes, and yeah, the last video I watched from him was the one month ago, as of the time of recording. What is the correct speed limit? But then the last two, which are clearly, as you said, about Japan, I haven't seen yet. So I know what I'm going to be doing after this podcast recording is done, but I've watched a lot of them
Perfect.
up to that point. Well, I don't know. Do you want to very quickly talk about if you've watched those latest two videos and the fact it's about Japan? Was there anything in particular that sort of stood out to you, or anything you found interesting about that?
I thought it was interesting. So I watched the latest one first, and then I got about halfway through the second to most recent one, and at that point, it was like, okay, we need to jump on and start recording so that we can get this done, so you can have your recording stocked up for the future. So I haven't seen the full episode on like regular commuter transit in Japan, but the one on like specialty trains, which is sort of the most recent one, that's the one that sort of came to mind immediately because there was a thing where he was talking about they have a train that's like just based on the idea of if you want to go and bike somewhere. So unlike most Japanese trains, which don't really provide space for people who want to get on a train with a bike, they've got like specific bike stands that you can slot bikes into, like as you go into the individual cars, and
Oh,
then individual spaces. So like I write a lot of trains because I do I say I do. I did a lot of traveling to and from, like back and forth between Japan and the U.S. for a huge part of my life. So I'm used to these like trains that are specifically designed to go to the airport, like the Narita Express,
right.
and they'll have these like open spaces that are just designed for you to put all your like giant luggage bags that you're planning to check or what have you. And they've got spaces like that on this train, except it's specifically for bikes. So
Okay.
um, the idea is that it makes it much easier to get around, like using public transit with your bicycle, and then you can go out and enjoy a day like biking for pleasure, or like if you want to bike to your destination or what have you, it makes it much easier. So I thought that was super interesting and sort of ties in with what we were saying before.
Yeah,
And then
exactly. What in the previous podcast, absolutely. Yeah, because you're saying the fact that you would do that, you would take the public transport, train or whatever, or bus to the start of the hike. You'd get to the other side of the valley or the mountain, wherever you're hiking around or hiking up that time, and then you just
hmm
take a different, public transport route back home, and that's it. Easy peasy.
yeah, it
Yeah,
was great. Yeah, I did it
that's
for
really
Mount
cool.
Fuji. Yeah.
That's something I really detest about the UK. Luggage space on UK trains sometimes it's absolutely horrific.
Mm.
It's very difficult, especially if you don't get on at the very first stop. If you get midway
hmm
along the route, it can be really awkward to deal with luggage space. And also, I mean, again, I'm stereotyping, I'm generalizing a bit, but people cannot play Tetris with luggage properly. I get really
Mm.
frustrated when I come on with my big suitcase and there are loads of little suitcases in the bottom rack of the luggage thing. I'm
hmm
just like, really? You could have all put them higher up, and then you got space for the big ones at the bottom. No, 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 no. But then, yeah, I agree with you. If you can find one that goes through an airport, or one way or the other, there's one in particular I like going from Edinburgh to Manchester, two
hmm
very important spaces on the Free of Dracula map. Again,
Yes.
that train often then goes, once it gets into the centre of Manchester, it continues to the airport. So there's quite a lot of luggage space. So that's really cool. So okay, I'm not going to be so stressed to try and find, luggage space. So that's pro
Yeah.
tip.
I
If
will
you find a train
say
that's going to an
luggage.
airport, it works.
Yeah, but I will say luggage space on a typical Japanese train is not very good.
Is it not?
Yeah, no.
Oh.
There's basically they have overhead racks, and that's about it. Like if you're just on a regular, like I'm gonna go from this stop to this other stop, like 4 or 5 stops over to another part of the city, uh, there was hardly any luggage space.
So that's going to be a problem if you're going on with your massive suitcase because you know you're going to be living in the country for a year or so.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
it makes that difficult.
Yeah. And even though you got a
I mean,
seat
you can.
reservation, just like, I'm just going to have to stand with this for the whole time now.
Well, usually these are the trains that you don't have seat reservations for, so
Okay. So we're not
that sort of
you're
combines.
not talking about the Shinkansen then.
Right. No, the Shinkansen is totally different. Um, Shinkansen generally has better luggage space, and you've got reserved seats. Although there are usually cars that have free seating on the Shinkansen for people who just want to jump on. But yeah, if you're talking about like a major express train or something like that, as opposed to just this train's here to like a local to get you around the city, right? So I guess you've got different tiers of experience, and then even then you've got like on the Shinkansen, you can get what they call a green car, which is like a fancier, like what I think what they used to call like a first class ticket or something like that. Um, you can get more accommodations, more space, better seats, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and that comes at a premium.
A very quick question because it
But
just popped into my head. Are Japanese trains nationalized or are they run by private companies?
Hi everyone, this is Arukimania cutting in from slightly forward in the future with a correction for some of the conversation you're about to hear. Since in Japanese a distinction is commonly drawn between JR and Shitetsu, or private rail, I was under the impression that the JR group was a government-owned entity. However, a little subsequent research informed me that while it used to be a public utility under the name JNR for Japan National Railways, the lines that are now known as JR were privatized in 1987. To make this extra confusing, I was also remembering correctly that there was a period of nationalization of Japanese railways earlier in history, with the government of Japan passing the Railway Nationalization Act in 1906. I suppose it's true what they say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. If you're interested in more details, though, please do check out the History of Japan podcasts series entitled The Iron Road. I take sole responsibility for my own confusion, and can still highly recommend the show. Anyway, apologies for the interruption, but I thought that was an important disclaimer to get out of the way before continuing on with our discussion.
they have both. And sometimes they even share a rail line, so it can get very confusing. Um, the biggest part of their network, I want to say, is nationalized. Some of that is because the government like bought up a bunch of private rail, and some of it is because the government initially invested into it. I was talking about the History of Japan podcast before. They've done a really good episode. It's just one guy. He's done a really good episode on the history of Japanese trains, and it is fascinating. Like the whole idea of the Shinkansen was basically this one person's like pet project that nobody else wanted to pay for, that he shoved through as an excuse to be part of the like push to make the Tokyo Olympics happen in like 1964 or whatever whatever the proper year is.
Wow.
And that was the only way he was able to get enough like support for the upfront funding to make that line happen. And of course, once it was built, everybody loves it. Everybody loved the Shinkansen. But at the time it was being created, it was such a massive upfront investment that nobody wanted to pay for it. So I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. And then of course the guy goes into for the History of Japan podcast, well, like goes into the initial development and all of that stuff and how it sort of started out as a government thing because the government was the one entity that could afford that sort of initial investment.
Right.
And
They'd
then
absorb the cost of that. Yeah, exactly.
after that point, it just starts making money and just very, very reliably for an incredibly long period of history. It just made money and made money and made money and made money. And of course, once people saw that, you started to get private rail and companies that were like, hey, we like the idea of making lots of money consistently year after year after year.
Funny
So
that.
maybe let's scrounge up some money for a big initial investment. And I think initially there were like different like rail sizes. I don't actually know that much about rails, so I think they call them gauges.
Do.
But okay, yeah. So they have like different rail gauges that they would use, and so there was no like standardization. And so that was one of the other things that happened when I think, if I remember correctly, again, this is all half remembered information from a podcast I listened to a long time ago. It's a sub series on the podcast called The Iron Road. If you're looking for those specific episodes, and I would definitely recommend them. But I sort of half remember the idea that one of the things that happened when the government bought up a lot of private rails was they were then able to go in and standardize the gauge so that it wasn't quite as drastic a change when you were going from one thing to the other. But there's still a little bit of weirdness happening with who owns what rail, and they'll end up being like sometimes continuous. And so sometimes, one of the last times I went to Japan, I bought a Japan Rail Pass, which is a great deal if you're visiting Japan and you want to be able to get around the country quickly and easily. It's not as convenient if you're going from like super far locations. Then it's generally better to take an airplane. So if you're going from Hokkaido to Okinawa or something like that, or not even Okinawa, but Hokkaido to Kyushu, like places that are really far apart, still makes more sense to take an airplane. But for the most part, if you want to go, like if you want to do Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, get a rail pass, and you'll end up saving a lot of money. It's sort of, I guess, a similar idea where you pay like a relatively high amount up front, but then you get basically unlimited use on all of the local trains and most of the Shinkansen. There are some like very specific Shinkansen trains that you're excluded from, but otherwise, if it's the National Railway, which is called JR, you can ride them with this pass without paying anything extra. And so I picked up this rail pass, and I was going. I think I was going out for a hike somewhere in Western Japan, and so I just get on the train. I showed the guy the rail pass at the turnstile, just went through, no problem, got on the train. And about halfway through, there was a guy coming down checking tickets, and he stopped at me and was like, "Hey, like, have you paid for your ticket?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" I showed him the rail pass. He was like, "Oh, well, this is the private part of the rail. So if you want to actually get to your destination, you now have to pay us, the private company, rail fare." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So fortunately, I was able to just pull out my cash and do that because the Japan I know, I think lately it's been sort of transitioning away from this, but the Japan I know is a very like cash-based economy. You can pay for lots of things in cash and pay in very high bills, and people are. When I was living in the country, people were fine with that. Again, I've heard that they've since moved more towards like electric funds and credit cards and things, more like the rest of the world. But when I was living there, it was still very much you have to have a lot of cash on you if you want to be like secure in going around. So I was able to very quickly pay that fare. But I was like, that's kind of weird that they've got this sort of both national and private like joint rail line construction thing going on. And so I think that's built off of the process that I was talking about, where the government was able to pick up some of these private lines, but not all of them. And so sometimes they're like interconnected in weird ways.
And that's really interesting that you can just get on a train, but then suddenly the rail changes and you end up being operated by a different company. That's unusual. In the UK,
Yeah, I'd never
would
had that
happen.
experience before. Yeah, that was it. It surprised me as someone who had done a lot of traveling in Japan up to that point. That came as a surprise to me too. Although to be fair, I don't do a lot of traveling in like Western Japan because I was stationed in Hachinohe, which is in northeastern Japan. That tends to be where I go all the time. So I don't I don't spend a lot of time traveling around the southwest parts of the country, and so I'm not as familiar with the rail practices there. But
look at this. They saw you. Oh, he's not from the south. We can take advantage of him.
yeah,
he has to pay. Yeah.
Well, they probably get a lot of clueless foreigners who think they can just skate by on the rail pass.
Probably. It's funny that you mentioned the rail pass because I mentioned to you off camera. I don't know if people who listen to us know there's the YouTube series Jet Lag, the game, and they do like the sort of, it's like a travel show, but it's also they do challenges. They'll go to a certain country or countries and they'll do challenges and things. So they created a game of Connect 4 using the states in America. They did a game of tag across Europe twice, and then they did a series where they did capture the flag across Japan. And then I found it. I was like, how are they paying for all these tickets? I do always wonder how much do all these this series cost to make. But they all started talking about this rail pass, and they were just able to get onto any train they want, and then they were able to switch trains really quickly if they suddenly realized in the game, oh, that person's going a different direction, need to change trains quickly. So yeah, they were just tapping in and out whenever they wanted. I found that really interesting.
It's amazing. It's the freedom and mobility that thing gives you is incredible.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that would never happen in the UK because the problem is the UK system is all franchised. So you would never ever. What I'm aware of, I mean, people may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, there's no way that you can just buy a pass that you can use on any franchise you want. That's ridiculous. You'd have to buy from individual franchises.
Yeah. It only works in Japan. To be fair, it only works in Japan because JR, the National Rails, owns so much of the network. There are those private rail companies, and the rail pass is no good for any of them. You have to pay separately for them all. So
sure,
it's sort of similar.
Yeah, I think just the UK rail system is just incredibly privatized compared to most other
Okay.
countries. It never used to be. I think back when it really started getting, started evolving, back over sort of the Victorian era, um, it, everything was franchised, from what I understand. Hello, everybody. Scott Sword here with a little interjection. I do apologize about the abruptness of this edit. There was no other really good place for me to slot it in. And you also notice that my interjection is not as well scripted as Rukamania's. I haven't written a script. What a rebel. Anyway, I just want to very quickly talk about my use of the word franchised in the sentence I've just said about the network during the Victorian era in the UK. That was just objectively the most incorrect word that I could have used. They weren't franchises at all because it was not a central body or anything that was, handing out contracts to private companies. Basically, as the railway network was booming during the Victorian era, there were just hundreds of little companies just sort of, springing up all over the place and taking on, responsibility of running regional, rail services. But eventually, over time, during the 19th and early 20th century, they were sort of amalgamating together. During the First World War, they did actually go under government control for a while. But then after the First World War, you're left with what we call in the UK the big four railway companies, which are Great Western Railway, the London and North Eastern Railway, the London and Midland Scottish Railway, and the Southern Railway. And if you look up any sort of steam locomotives from the UK from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, you'll see the livery for one of these companies on the side of them. But then after the Second World War, the British government did actually take these big four companies because they were losing money at that time and amalgamated them together and then nationalized them under the banner of British Railways. So that's how that all worked. I do apologize for my incompetence. That is what happens when you don't do enough research. But then, to be fair, I was expecting this exact topic to come up. But as somebody who likes trains and British history, I should have known better. This is information that has slowly seeped away from my brain over time. I need to do more research about it. And also, it's a case of my mouth going quicker than my brain and not thinking about what I was saying. So apologies for that. Back to the video. And then it became renationalized again. I think I'm going to say during the Second World War or after it became nationalized as British Rail. But then during the 1980s, we had a Prime Minister called Margaret Thatcher, who's basically like our version of, I guess it was Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, yep.
Who is very, very neoliberal and wanted to privatize everything. And basically, we had a lot of nationalized industry in the UK, like the rail line, energy, telecommunications, all that sort of stuff. It all got privatized. So then what you got now is this system where all these different companies are trying to outbid each other for certain franchise agreements, which run in certain regions. You do get some which overlap with each other. So like the one I was talking about from Edinburgh to Manchester is a franchise called TransPennine because it goes over the Pennine Hills, but then there's also one that operates in a similar area called Northern. So they might share rail tracks and things because it's all the same gauge. There's no problem with that. But there's certain services that they try to bid for. But then a lot of the franchises fail because they tried to, you can imagine these companies tried to win the contract by promising something that's undeliverable, and then when the government realizes they're failing, the government takes it over again and tries to find somebody else to run the franchise. But a lot of times they can't. So some of them are becoming a little bit more nationalized now. But again, that's another very ideological political debate: should you nationalize industry or not? Hello, everybody. Scott Sword here. Another quick interjection. Apologies for that. I promise it's the last one of the podcast. I just wanted to quickly clarify something, just in case there are any history buffs or politics buffs out there who are already typing in the comments to correct me, because it's something that I didn't know about either. I was talking about Margaret Thatcher's love for privatization, and that was true. can't deny that. But it's actually the privatization of British Rail, or the British Railway Network, took place between 1994 and 1997. And Margaret Thatcher actually had resigned as Prime Minister in 1990. So it was her successor, John Major, whose government oversaw the privatization of the British Rail Network. I don't know in terms of the history if the idea of privatization of the network started prior to Margaret Thatcher's resignation or not. I'm not certain of that. But yeah, it was actually under the Conservative government of John Major, which is the same political party as Margaret Thatcher, who ended up privatizing the British rail network and then creating the franchise structure that we have nowadays. Just thought I'd get that in there. Back to the podcast. But I think, from what I understand, in terms of, I hate using this word, but Western countries in Europe
Mhm.
and then America, it's very unusual, from what I understand, to have such a privatized rail network.
Hmm.
In Spain, there are private companies in Spain, but most of it's through Renfe, which is the national body. In Germany, you've got Deutsche Bahn. I assume in France it's the same. So yeah, it's they are bringing in private companies now, but a lot of it is run through, as you said, like Japan Rail, JR, I guess it's Japan Railways, or however
Yeah.
the translation would be. It's most of it is run through that public body, so then you can do things like this, like these rail passes and stuff. The interesting thing, you're talking about gauges, I think, again, from what I understand, between France and Spain, they use a different gauge. But there are trains
Oh.
that go across the border, so then they have to use their own track. Or there are some trains that can go through and change gauge.
Right. I've heard of those
Um,
as well. Yeah.
and it's always funny when there's a high speed rail which goes through Spain. There are a couple of times where, depending on what part of the rail network you're on, I think the gauge changes a little bit, so you have to very slowly go through like this kind of like converter that shifts you to the other gauge, and then off you go again. In the UK, we don't have high speed rail. They're trying to build one, which is called
Hmm.
HS2, which seems a bit weird. Where was HS1? I don't know what
Oh,
happened there.
okay.
But it's kind of become this like huge. I mean, I'm going to say elephant in the room. That's like the easiest way to explain it. It's become this really annoying sort of taboo topic now. They started building it between London and Birmingham,
Mhm.
and it should be extended further north. But now they're saying no, it's too expensive. We're going to stop it at Birmingham. So we're literally going to have like one rail, like high-speed line between Birmingham and London. That's all it seems it's going to be. But even now, like we've got
Wow.
an election. As of the time of recording, we've got an election coming up in 2 weeks. The 4th of July. I thought it was kind of appropriate, the date of the election, especially as an
Yeah, it's
American.
somewhat ironic if as an American, yeah.
Yeah. It's also the day that I go away on my summer break as well. So then by the time the next time we speak in this podcast, there'll be a different prime minister most likely. Well, no, it's a foregone conclusion who's going to win. But again, there's a huge sort of division between the parties on who's going to keep this high-speed rail line going and who's going to quit it. But honestly, to be honest, even though they're all sort of split opinion, nobody's really talking about it because there's just other
Hmm.
issues which are, having causing more traction in terms of in the debates and all this sort of thing. Nobody's really talking about HS2. I haven't heard anybody talk about it apart from in the manifesto. It's like, oh, we're going to cancel it. Oh, we're going to keep going with it. But nobody's really talking about HS2. Maybe the communities
Mhm.
which are affected by it or could have positive benefits from it might be, but no. So yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
So that was that was the addendum. I think was that everything, or have we somehow managed to keep talking about something else that was completely unrelated again? What have we done?
No,
Um,
I think that's the addendum. I think we, it's
I
us.
think
We
that was it.
threw in some
Yeah.
tangents in here and there, but I think you're
Yes.
right because I'm looking at the document now. We've got the YouTube black box, which we talked about, and we've got the addendum, which is public transport cycling in UK, Spain, COVID. So I think
Yep.
that's
That's our
everything we
stuff.
needed to cover there.
Perfect. So we can actually move on to our main topic. Look at that. After only 45 minutes, let's go.
It's way better than like an entire episode of feedback that we did that one time.
Yeah, but you know what's going to happen after when the next podcast that we do after the summer, assuming the
Hmm.
viewers want us to keep going with it, and I hope so. Then I think we're just going to have an entire podcast just dedicated to what happened during the summer, because there's going to be so much stuff that's probably happened within the 2-3 months that we haven't spoken. There'll be a lot of things
Yeah,
going on
probably.
in the world, but also just with us. So yeah. We may need
Yeah,
to
and if we get any comments asking for feedback on different topics, we'll have those
right,
to respond to.
right.
Banked
We'll
up.
have an entire follow-up episode again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're going to tell the good people what's the main topic going to be, or main topics. It depends on how long we take to go through each one of them. What's the vibe going to be for this podcast? Still on the topic of sort of Spain and UK and America and Japan. Obviously, that's never going to go away. But what's the particular thing we're going to talk about today?
Well, it looks like we've got a few different options here. The first one being weird cultural aspects of our own countries.
Mm. Right. So yeah. So we've talked about culture shocks before, right? But in this is why when I tried to write this, it was in terms of things that when you actually think about it, either if it's your home country or the countries that we lived slash are living in, um, things that when you see it, you go, oh, that's actually really really strange. That's not when you think about it and sort of break it when you're in that mindset. Oh yeah, that's completely normal. But when you actually break it down line by line, or you're explaining it to somebody else, it's a bit weird.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'll go first because there's one in particular that I want to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean to be fair, we talked about toilets in the previous episode. We were quite explicit in that one. We're gonna have to talk not about toilets, but we're gonna be talking about pooing for the next wee while. The Catalans, the area of Spain that I live is called Catalonia, is in the northeastern part of Spain. Catalans have an obsession with pooing, and I don't mean pooing in terms of like the action, like them doing it personally, but just figures of people, or just incorporating pooing into situations where you don't really need pooing to exist. So the easiest, there's a couple I can explain. So the first one, it's also a Christmas one. Again, we should probably do we could bring this up again in a Christmas podcast if we ever do one. Also, I should probably say at this point, if there are any little kids listening, they should probably stop listening to the podcast. I don't know why there would be little kids listening, but just in case, if you're a viewer and you've got a little kid who's in the room with you, might be best to stop the podcast now, and then return at a later point. Because obviously we're going to discuss certain Christmas traditions, and obviously
Maybe we'll have to. Maybe we'll have to
wanna-
actually put in some timestamps for this one.
We might have to,
People
yeah,
will-
exactly.
People
Yeah,
will know
yeah,
when they can start. They'll know when they can start listening again.
yeah, we don't want any innocence being lost too early, so that's what's happening. But basically, so
Yeah. Even if it's not kids, I think there's a certain extent to which it's like, okay, if you don't want this sort of content, then it's handy to be able to skip past it.
yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think this one will be quite funny because this is going to be one of these things when unless the viewers know about this, they're going to be like, "What? What are you talking about?" Right? So it's one of these things like when you think about sort of the Christmas tradition of Santa Claus or Father Christmas, or however you want to call him, when you distill it down and explain it line by line, it's pretty wacky, right? It's when you've got a situation of this man who lives at the North Pole, quite a sizable man, I'll add to that too, gets in a sleigh with all the presents, and these flying reindeer take him around the world, and he drops down chimneys and leaving all the presents in your house, and then eats your food, by the way. Any food you leave, he'll eat, and then he delivers all the presents to all the children in one night, right? That on its own sounds ridiculous. The Catalans can take it to another level. What I'm about to explain will probably make Father Christmas sound very plausible. Which is, there's a thing in Catalonia called the cagatillo. Most people in Catalonia just call it el tío. They don't say cagatillo. They just say tío. Basically what it is, a lot of kids here traditionally have cagatillo, but they also combine it nowadays with Father Christmas or Santa Claus because they see all the American movies, and we were talking before off camera and on camera about American influence. Santa Claus is now a thing here too, right? I want to make that clear. It's not devoid of Santa Claus, and people will have Christmas trees in their house as well, even though it doesn't snow here at all, apart from the mountains, because they've seen it on TV and they've seen the traditions and that sort of thing. But the tradition here is a thing called Tío de Nadal, Cagatillo, or just Tío, whatever you want. It's basically a log which normally has a smiley face, either painted or glued onto it, something like that, and it arrives at your house. Some kids even have this tradition where they have to go off into the forest to find Tío. And they bring it back home, or maybe they'll find it on their doorstep one morning at the beginning of December, right? So almost like an advent calendar, this thing arrives at the beginning of the month of December. I don't know. Do you know about this, by the way?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, you're going to be enlightened here. So this log, this Christmas log, arrives in your house looking cute with its smiley face on. And every night or every day, the children are expected to feed Cagatillo. Now, again, depending on the family, you get lots of different responses when you ask people, what did you feed Cagatillo? Some, if they're a little bit stingy, would just give him the peel of the fruit that you eat at dinner and lunchtime. there are some who actually give him the whole fruit to eat. Some will even leave chocolates and turon. Turon is, I don't know if it's Catalan or Spanish. I assume it's Catalan, maybe it's Spanish too. It's basically nougat. I don't know if that's something you know in the States.
It's not ringing any bells.
No, okay, that's fun. Okay, the easy thing, I'm gonna have to probably ping this to you then. So nougat is like this sort of bar that is made up from whipped egg whites and sugar and honey. Maybe there's nuts inside. I'll ping it to you 1 second.
Huh.
It's very very riveting for the viewers while you're waiting for me to send this to a rook. But Turon is like the Spanish / Catalan version. I'm gonna double check if it's Catalan or Spanish. There you go. There's a link for you in the Discord.
Oh, okay. Nougat.
Well, it says Mediterranean. So I guess it's kind of everywhere then. Oh no, this is for the some from Alicante. Okay, it's a Spanish thing then. Okay, it's not Catalan, it's a Spanish thing. Okay, that's fine. And it also says that in Italy they eat it too, so it's kind of a Mediterranean thing that they like to eat this. I don't know what the difference is between Turon and nougat. I don't eat it. I don't have a sweet tooth. I think we've mentioned that before, so we'll leave that be. Anyway, so some people, if they're feeling very generous, they'll give Tio this nougat and whatever. Anyway, what happens is, depending on the day, normally it's on the 24th of December, but it depends on the family. Often children will have to do it with the two sides of the family, so they'll do it on different days. It just depends on the situation, how the family organize it. But on an evening, around the 24th, 25th, 26th of December, more or less, Tio is ready to give you the presents. And I didn't explain that the caga bit of cagatio basically means to shit. So, I kid you not, after eating for the entire month, this log is going to shit out the presents. So, the way this works is you cover Cagatio with a blanket, and again, I'm going to say this, I've never seen this in person, because unfortunately the younger cousins in my wife's family, by the time that I got into the family and, you know, became an established member, were then too old to have Cagatio. So I've personally not seen it in action, but I can't wait to see it, because it must be really funny to watch. Anyway, so you cover Cagatio with a blanket, and then the kids basically ask Cagatio to give the presents. But it's not like Santa Claus where you go to sleep and then the presents are magically there. No. The kids bully Cagatio to give them the presents. Yeah, they get a stick, which they then have to... anyway, I'll explain that in a second. So they have a stick that they basically beat Cagatio with. And while they're beating him, trying to make him shit out the presents, they sing a song. And I'm going to find the song, and I'm going to say it to you.
Okay.
Now, I've also... I did a little bit of research about this.
All month. And then just to beat him?
Oh, you're going a little bit robotic on me, Rook. You might want to repeat that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just expressing my incredulity at the fact that they've been feeding him all month, and now they're going to beat him for not giving them presents.
Oh no! They're beating him to give them the presents.
Well, that's what I mean, right? It's like they have to beat him after they've it's like they're taking care of him, except all of a sudden they turn on him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
They have to beat him up to get the presents.
They're just encouraging him to poo. It sounds so weird.
So they're not actually trying to get presents. This isn't like we've been feeding you and now you owe us presents and we're gonna beat you up and you're gonna poo out the presents. It's we've been feeding you and now we need you to poo, and as a result of that, we're gonna represent it with presents.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know what to say. It's so wacky, right? I think the idea is that the log is magical. It converts orange peel and chocolate into presents.
That part of it I'm less mystified by, as opposed to why they're beating the log.
I don't know. That's
one thing. I don't think that would encourage anyone to poo. For one thing.
What?
And then for another, is this like you owe us presents? You're saying no, right? You're saying it's not like you're an ungrateful guest. Oh, you just don't know. Okay, because neither do I. I'm very confused.
So you're basically saying to the log, we've taken care of you for a month. Give us our presents that we deserve.
Well, that's how it sounds to me, right?
Or we're throwing you back into the forest. I don't know. I don't think it's meant as menacingly as that. It's just literally the log is magic, but you need to hit him to get the presents.
Okay.
So,
I guess to be fair, we do have pinatas.
well, yeah.
You don't feed pinatas for a month, but you do beat them up to get presents. So,
That's even worse because you break the pinata. You're not breaking the log.
right,
You,
yeah,
you,
that's true.
you. I'm making it sound really bad. You're just tapping the top of the log, but you are beating the TO.
Okay.
So when I was doing research about this, 'cause I was trying to find the lyrics. I wanted to sing the song, but I've now also discovered that there's a lot of regional varieties of the song. So, depending if there are any Catalan people listening, they might be able to ascertain where I'm from based upon the lyrics of the song that I'm using. But never mind, we'll go with the flow. Okay, this is the one that my wife taught me. So I'm going to now try and do it in Catalan. I apologize to A, for my singing voice, and B, if I mispronounce anything, I'm sorry, my Catalan's not very good. So imagine all these kids hitting the tio, singing this song. Caga tio, tio de Nadal. No caguis arengades, que son masas salades, caga turons, que son mes bons. So, the translation of the song is literally shitting log, Christmas log, don't shit herrings, which are too salty, shit turon, the nougat, which are much better. So, at which
So I
point,
guess the regular thing that you would expect from log excrement is herons.
yeah, out of all the things you could have picked,
Or sorry, I think I said herons. Herrings.
herrings, yeah. Out of all the things they could have picked, you just don't want salty stuff, I suppose. It's so random.
Makes me think of that Monty Python thing about cutting down a tree with a herring.
I'm going to show my ignorance. I'm a British guy and I've never seen Monty Python. I'm so sorry. I know if Roscoe's listening to this, he's just I can feel his eyes burning the back of my head the fact I'm saying that. I've never seen Monty Python. I know that's a crime.
Oh, it's just sort of an impossible task, and then it turns into a quick like throwaway line. It's not one of their best setup gags, but when you're talking about herring and trees, like
Yeah.
that's what I think of.
Maybe where they got it from. I have no idea.
Cut down a tree with a herring? That can't be done.
Oh dear. So at which point, once you finish singing the song, you whip away the blanket and all the presents are there, right? I'll make this really clear now that normally the Tio gives little presents. So you're looking at small things like maybe Turon, which is kind of ironic. You've been feeding maybe potentially if you're a very, extravagant family, you give Turon to the Tio for a month and then he gives you more Turon, but never mind. And like little bits of pieces for school, like little books or stationery sets and all that sort of stuff, maybe socks, that sort of thing. They're not like the huge presents, right? Because then in Spain, there's another tradition, which is the Three Kings. They don't normally, in the rest of Spain, they don't celebrate Santa Claus coming on the 24th of December. Now they probably do because of the influence from Hollywood films and all that sort of stuff, but in the old days, no. The tradition is the Three Kings that come at the beginning of January. I think it's I'm going to get this wrong now. Is it the 5th of January? Is the night when the three... It's like the three wise men.
I think that's right. I think it's the traditional end of the... What is it? The 12 Days of Christmas?
Right. That would make sense then. So yeah, so the what we would call the three wise men from the nativity, they bring presents, and they also do parades through the street and all that stuff. And it's really interesting when you talk to people here, when I ask them, did you, I guess if I'm talking to adults, did you celebrate Santa Claus or the Three Kings or Catalunya? A lot of them do all three. Some do Tio and then the Three Kings. All of them celebrate the Three Kings, but some do Santa, some not. Some, well, if they come from a Catalan family, they'll do the Tio. Otherwise, they don't. It just depends. So yeah, anyways, as I say, so after they've sung this song, you whip away the blanket and all the presents are there. I did want to make it clear then, there's this whole also ritual about how do you get the presents underneath the blanket, so the kids don't
I was
see.
wondering about that, because if you're saying, the parents put the blanket on and then they take it out and the presents are there, like how did that happen?
So there's a ritual that happens, and again, every family does it slightly differently. It'd be very funny to see if anybody comments if they are Catalan and then how their family did it. But I've heard lots of different answers. One of the most popular answers I've heard is that in order for the magic to work, the stick has to be wet. So the kids have to leave with the sticks with one of the adults and go to the kitchen or the bathroom and make sure that the sticks are really wet before they come and
Mm-hmm.
do the song. Some would then know the sticks have to be hot, so they start sticking the sticks down the back of radiators and all this sort of thing to try and get them warm before they do it. Some had to go and pray, or some had to go and practice the song, because you get the song wrong, you don't get the presents, right? Any
Oh,
sort
okay.
of any sort of construction, right, to get them out of the room for about
Mm-hmm.
5-10 minutes, right? And then suddenly, all the adults in the room will start shouting, "Ah, I think the log is ready to shit," right? And then all the kids run in and they do the song, right?
Yeah.
So that's how that works. So
Wow.
obviously, when you hear it, I mean, it's it's now I'm kind of, again, I haven't seen it in person, but because I've heard about it so much, and every single Christmas I end up talking to people about Tio. For me now it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of normal, but I'm probably gonna have that moment when I see it for the first time. I'm gonna be in that sort of state of incredulousness, especially hopefully, I don't know when, but hopefully one day, there will be, a mini Scott sword in this world, right? And then obviously we're going to have to do a very good job of teaching it Scottish and Catalan culture and Spanish culture and British culture. So we will definitely have the Tio, and, having to do it with them for the first time, that would be very interesting. So yeah, so you've got that.
That's
Not
wild.
not only that, so I want to paint a picture here for the there's that you think, oh, that's the only thing about shitting. Oh, no. Nope. So, the very first time I came over to visit my wife, because for people who don't know, maybe missed a previous podcast, my wife and I met in Scotland, but then we ended up having a distance relationship for 6 years. So that involved us traveling backwards and forwards between Spain and Scotland whenever we could during the holidays when we had breaks from university study and stuff. So the very first time I came over here was, I think, the December of 2013, I think would be the right date. Had a finished my exams. I had a few days, so obviously I flew into Barcelona. My wife was living there at the time, and all the Christmas markets and stuff were out, right? So we're all having lots of fun, walking around, looking at, and also me being in a city. I mean, you would know it, like the first time you stepped into Japan, right? Just that sense of
Mm-hmm.
wonder. You're looking at everything. You're so hypersensitive to everything around you because it's a completely new country. You've never been there. You're paying attention to everything, all this sort of stuff, right? You never forget that kind of feeling in the first moment that you arrive.
By the way, Christmas markets, very
And welcome our guest star, Robotic Aruk.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh, you're back now. Okay, I don't know what's going on.
I am? Okay.
Yeah, you're back. Sorry, repeat that.
Oh, I just was okay. Christmas markets are very
Oh dear. I think we've got
and
some technical difficulties, folks. I think I'm going to pause the
oh
podcast,
no.
and we'll come back in a second. Okay, we're back. Everything's working. Literally, the only two times Aruk went robotic was when you were trying to explain something. So we'll try that again. Third time lucky, Aruk.
Yeah, maybe the third time will be the charm. I was just trying to say that Christmas markets are European. They're not very American. And ironically, the only reason I've heard about them is because I've worked on projects for games that come out, translating games from Japan, where they feature like trips to Christmas markets.
Ah, I had no idea. I would have thought because, I mean, I know maybe not so much now, but there was quite a huge not as much as maybe say the UK and Spain, but there was a lot of German people who emigrated to the US. Did they not take that sort of culture of Christmas markets over with them?
Well, they might have. Uh, from what I understand, which is pretty hazy, just to give people another warning. From what I understand, a lot of the German people who came to the U.S. sort of settled in like certain regions, and they didn't like spread out through the country. So it might be that in those communities or like in those areas, that they still have that sort of tradition. But like I'd never experienced or knew about the tradition of Christmas markets at all growing up.
Wow.
And
okay.
yeah, it was working on games where people would be like, okay, we're from Japan, we're gonna go on a European vacation for this part of the, story for whatever, reason that they've come up with to make things work out so that they can go visit Europe. And what better reason to travel than for some sort of Christmas thing? So they go and they get to experience, and it's specifically a thing that they want to go experience the Christmas markets while they're in Europe because that's such a European thing.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't even considered. It's just so normal here, right? In the UK, you got Christmas market. In Germany, there are so many Christmas markets. I like it's like their thing. Right? Like even the
Hmm.
one in Edinburgh is German themed. It's such a
Wow.
big thing from Germany, and even like yeah, in Spain not so much because if you go to a really big city like Barcelona, yeah, there's going to be lots of stalls and people selling artisan products and Christmas decorations and all this sort of stuff. It's yeah, it's pretty common to be honest. Interesting. Okay. Another,
Cool.
I
Yeah,
guess,
just
in Japan, there's no like equivalent in any
no.
way.
Japan's view of Christmas is
Oh,
pretty different. They it's for the most part they have it, right? Because we were talking about the like Americans exporting their culture all around the world. And sort of as a result, Christmas and also Halloween have become their own holidays in Japan.
right.
And Christmas in particular is sort of seen as like a dating holiday in Japan. And
Oh,
they have they have a very specific set of traditions as well that are like based around KFC, where or like specific foods. So KFC is sort of like an outgrowth of this, where it's just tradition that around Christmas time you order your special Christmas KFC chicken set, right?
I've heard about that. That is actually a
Yeah.
thing. Then it's something I came across on the internet. I was like, no way is that real.
Oh yeah, that's they definitely do it in Japan.
Wow.
And similarly, you can order Christmas cakes, which are specifically designed to like either show up at your door if you're doing it through the mail or appear in these like local bakeries. They're all designed to be like these perfect, nice little cakes that you eat specifically on Christmas.
That's
So
amazing.
those are the sort of two food related things that Japan does for Christmas, and they've got there's like statues that they have outside the stores. They'll put Santa hats on those, and sometimes you'll see like if you get on a bus, sometimes the bus drivers will be wearing Santa hats. Uh,
Obviously, but it's not something that comes from. It's Japan's sort of interpretation of this holiday that is not theirs.
right, and the really big deal holiday and time off, where like Christmas is no sort of national holiday in Japan, but New Year's like everything shuts down for like the 3 days before and the 3 days
Oh
something
dear.
like that. Yeah. So it's much more culturally relevant that New Year's happens as opposed to Christmas. But they do have this sort of new idea, like the Japanese interpretation of Christmas. And I think part of the reason it is featured a lot of times in media is because of that like that romantic angle. So if they have like a
Right.
romance subplot in their thing, it's like, okay, let's do something for Christmas and it'll be really romantic. Let's go browse a Christmas market on a European vacation as a couple, right?
Yeah. In the
Something
in the
like that.
snow as well, right?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah.
Always in the snow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very fair. You broke up a little bit, but I feel like it's fixed now. But we'll just keep running with it and just hope. If you die again, we might have to reset the call or something.
Yeah.
We heard
Well, let me
most of
know.
what you said, so that's okay.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully the connection evens out, but we'll see how it goes. And anyway, that's all a long tangent from the wonder of you marveling at the newness of Spain and everything going on around Christmas time.
Oh yeah, indeed. Especially Barcelona, right? 'Cause I'd never been there before,
Hmm.
and didn't have a huge sort of something else we'll talk about if we have time about what to expect from Barcelona, right? So it's not something I'd done a lot of research about. Maybe my wife had shown me bits and pieces, obviously, but it's still the first time, and obviously then being with her and everything, and it's like you're so hypersensitive to everything. So anyway, went into one of these Christmas markets and then saw all of these Dios lined up, and obviously that was something my wife had not explained to me at the time, right? Because
Hmm.
something you don't really bring up on a first date. Oh,
Right.
what's your name? What are your interests? Oh yeah, did you know that in my country at Christmas we have this weird log that shits out presents, right? It's not a normal conversation that comes up. But
Maybe
anyway,
not in
all
your
these.
conversations.
Well, that's true. Yeah, maybe we just need to reassess where we're at as a couple. To be honest, I think maybe we didn't do dating correctly. That's a message to all of you out there. Check out what Christmas traditions that your potential partner has. If they're really, really weird, just run away as far as possible. Or maybe not. Embrace it. Just as long as you know you don't get the culture shock. um, but so all of these, smiling logs were sort of staring at me, and I was like, what the heck is that? And then she kind of explained to me, and I was like, okay, that's weird. That's weird, but okay, I'll just accept it and move on. Went to the next stand, and the next stand was just exclusively filled with all of these little wooden models of a
Mhm.
traditional Catalan man. There isn't really a traditional Catalan dress so much. Well, there is one. For the women, there is a type of dress that they wear. That's often more for, well, we were talking about Halloween, right? They don't call it Halloween here. It's called Castanada, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
And there's a whole tradition there of, women who are there, selling chestnuts and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, that's a different thing. But the men, they have a red hat, almost kind of not like a French beret, but it's a little bit similar. But it's got like a little bobble kind of on top. It's a little bit
Hmm.
puffier than a beret. But anyway, so you can imagine this sort of red hat. So all these statues had this, red hat on. I should make it clear now that the unusual thing with these statues were that all of them showed the man pulling down his trousers and literally defecating. Not just about to defecate. No. Bare ass showing and a and a lump of poo on the ground next to him. So then prompt my reaction, what the actual F is that? After seeing the log, just I was about to lose
Oh
my mind
man,
completely. And then at
I
which
have
point
no
she,
words.
yeah, exactly. And at which point my wife just like nonchalantly, like completely, like everything's normal. Oh yeah, that's the kagane, like literally the shitter. And I was like, is this like a touristy gimmick? She was like, no. Like we put him in our nativity set. Prompt then my question, then what the fuck? What is that? So yeah, when they build the nativity sets here, and I'm going to say now, again, I'm not that it is a divisive thing, but I'm not a very religious man. I mean, that's an understatement. I'm not religious at all, but I do like the way they build the nativity sets here because there's a lot of thought goes behind it. It's not just a little model that you buy pre-built and you put it in your lounge or hallway or wherever it is that you want to have it, right, during the holiday
Mhm.
period. They actually literally build their own nativity. They'll get like an entire table, and they'll clear it, and they'll literally, I'm not joking, they'll put like moss down on it, and they'll get all these little like imagine like little Lego or like Playmobil like fences and put that around it, and they'll put the stable down, and they'll construct all the figures and all this sort of thing. They'll have like like farmyard animals that you use as toys when you're kids. They'll literally buy loads
Mhm.
of them and make it look like a proper farm scene and all this sort of thing. A lot of work goes into it.
Wow.
It's a labor of love, even if they're not an extremely religious family, right? It's something that is still very very much present in all the
Yeah.
houses. And somewhere in this nativity scene, they call it the Belen in Catalan. Somewhere in this nativity scene, hidden in a corner somewhere, you got the baby Jesus and Joseph and Mary and the three wise men and the donkeys and all that stuff. There'll be this little Catalan man with his red hat taking a shit. And that's the gag in there. um,
Unbelievable.
so I don't know where the origin of the Tio, the log, comes from, but this one, the origin that I've discovered is just based upon the idea of like it's to do with good luck and fertility, like literally like in terms of like fertilizing the soil and all this sort of thing.
Hmm.
Still, obviously a bit wacky when you see it for the first time. Not only that, you can kind of imagine that there's now they've got the traditional Kagane statues, but they've also got loads of others now which are based upon celebrities. So you'll have Lionel Messi taking a shit, and who else? I don't know, like Rafael Nadal taking a shit, or Barack Obama taking a shit. Right? Literally anybody you can think of.
Wow.
Yeah, it's and I've even got one. One of my wife's friends gave me a Kagane of a Scottish man with his bagpipes and the kilt and the whole Highland dress taking a shit. So yeah, it's yeah. Now very normal, but very strange the first time you see it. It's quite a shock because no one
Very
prepares you for
strange.
that. They
Very
don't put
strange. The first time
yeah
hearing about it.
they don't put it on the tourist like leaflets and stuff. It's not on the front page of TripAdvisor, right? So it's not a
Yeah.
gimmick. It's a
These
legitimate
these
thing.
places need to rethink their
Their marketing
approach to
strategy.
tourism. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's
Along with the dating strategy. Yeah.
so that is being Catalonia's obsession with pooing.
why why
That's my
isn't that
story.
front and center?
Well,
Unbelievable.
I know, yeah, no. And
I'm not
I need to
actually
apply.
surprised.
I have to apply for a job in the Catalan tourist board. Like you're pitching this at the wrong angle. Yeah, you've got the Sagrada Familia and the beautiful Mediterranean coastline, but what people really want to learn about is why you're just obsessed with pooing when it's not necessary to be obsessed with pooing. I know
Yeah.
we talked about in the previous episode that British people are not very, we don't really care about taboo, right? We'll say that we're going for a shit like very openly. Again, depends
Hmm.
on the company. Let me make that really clear, right? Um, we will say we're going to the toilet without thinking, but that's still a little bit mad, right? That still takes a bit of an adjustment when you first see the Caganel, the Tio, right? But
Yeah.
that's my contribution mostly in terms of
Oh,
weird things.
yeah. That is wild.
There are probably other things in the rest of Spain, but I don't know them because I haven't experienced them. If I find any more, I'll tell you.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I don't have anything on that level. I
Well,
don't
you
have
say that,
anything on that level.
but I
Go
might
ahead.
still be amazed when you say it, though.
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think I had a different sort of thing in mind when you actually put the topic in there. Because there was one thing I thought of, like back beforehand, which was sort of related to something I talked about in terms of like a bit of culture shock, which
Hmm.
I think I had brought up that one of the things that in the presentation that I went to at the start of all my experience on the JET program, um, they had talked about how value is sort of perceived differently in Japan as opposed to the US, whereas in the States you're always looking for a bargain,
Right.
and that's an aspect of US culture that I'd never questioned before, and so sort of to illustrate that, and I thought as sort of a funny thing about US culture when I saw this show up in the document, like weird cultural aspects of our own cultures, I thought I could go to this example where I was actually wasn't home, but I was on vacation in the States. So what happened was I was living in Japan, and so the first year, I flew home for Christmas, and then the second year, my family came to visit me in Japan for Christmas. And the third year, I was like, hey, let's try and meet somewhere in the middle. So we met in California, and we had a nice little family vacation there, and got to sort of experience Christmas when it was temperate weather as opposed to cold, which it was in both of the other places. So uh, as part of that experience, we just happened to want to go see a movie. So we went to this movie theater, and they do this thing all these like special deals and things. So I asked for a small popcorn and a small soda because I had just been like all of my like ideas about in the States,
Oh
because
no.
in the States they
Robot
give you all these
robot Rook has returned.
the return of the robots.
Yeah, we're gonna have to deal with this. Sorry, people. We'll be back in a second. Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that, people. I think it was a case of turning it off and turning it back on again. There's something wrong with our Discord call. It looks back to normal now. Let's hope it is. Right, sorry, Rook. Before you got interrupted by Robo, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. Hopefully there is no return of Robo Aruk, but yeah, I was talking about family vacation in California, and this is not actually. I only bring that up because it might be a California thing, but I suspect it's just a U.S. thing. And so, as part of this vacation, we wanted to go see a movie. We went to a movie theater. They had what I think is very common in the States, and I don't know what it's like around the world, but you could buy these special deals on popcorn and soda. And often they'll like um, group them together in sets, or if they don't do that, you'll get one size and they'll say, hey, would you like to upgrade to a larger size for a quarter more, something like that. And so they're always looking to charge you for a little bit more for the next size up and make it sound like a great deal. And I've been living in Japan and I was very used to Japanese portion sizes. So I thought, okay, let's look, because they've got the display thing where you can see, because they want to show you the value you're going to get for your money, right? If you get the small, it's just this tiny little bag. If you get the large, it's like more than 3 people ever need to eat of popcorn. No judgment. It's just an incredibly large tub of the stuff, is my way of expressing that. And so, back in the day, it's like, okay, well, I want to go for the best deal. I want to get the most bang for my buck. Let's like get one of these giant tubs and split it or something like that. And this time I was like, no, like I'm the only one who feels like eating at the moment, so I'll just get a small popcorn and a small soda. And the person behind the counter was like, oh, well, you could get a medium popcorn and a small soda, and it's like 25 cents less or something. So it was actually a little bit cheaper. I don't remember the exact specifics of the deal, but it was slightly cheaper for more food. And I said, oh, no, thanks. I just want the smalls. And they looked at me like I was insane. And like it seemed to me like I could have been detecting this incorrectly, but it seemed to me like they were personally offended, because what they then, like, they went through the transaction, and at the end of it they said to me, like, I was just trying to save you some money.
Oh, sure.
And I was like, okay, like,
Wow,
I appreciate that.
That's you told.
Yeah. And I'm just like, well, I didn't want the larger size.
Wow.
So that was an aspect of like culture shock where it's like, yeah, like it is sort of weird that we're so used to always looking for value. And I never questioned that growing up. Never. It never even occurred to me to question it. And, I go live in Japan for a little while, and not only do my like ideas of portion sizes change, but so does the act of getting what I want from something, right? I'm not necessarily always going to look for the best deal if it's not what I want, right? I want stuff that's not going to influence my behavior. It's just going to give me the thing that I asked for.
Especially in a case like this where you're talking about something you're going to consume immediately. If you're doing, like, if I'm in the supermarket or something doing a weekly shop or whatever, that's a different story, because then I'd be like, okay, I know, for example, right, even if I buy too much, I can freeze some of it or keep it in the fridge long enough, or I can make even a bigger portion and, and distribute across the whole week or whatever. If you're doing something where you're going to consume immediately, yeah, I can understand where maybe in certain situations you might not go for the biggest size possible. But again, I think in the UK, I don't think in the UK it's to such an extent. I think we're still, whatever the customer wants, they get, kind of thing. If they want a smaller size, they get a smaller size. But I'm trying to think in any situations where that would happen. I think we have a thing in the UK, which again I think is a very UK-based thing. A lot of people, for lunch, they will pop out to a little supermarket or a shop near their office, and they'll buy a thing called a meal deal. A meal deal is literally consisting of a sandwich, some sort of other lunch-based snack, so crisps or some sort of, like, I don't know, nutrition bar or something along those lines, and then a drink. And normally if you buy all 3 things together, you get quite a big discount. So much so that sometimes it is cheaper to do that than to buy just the drink and the sandwich. It's kind of weird. But you won't get, I mean, sometimes when you go to, like, especially to the, like, automated tills and stuff, they might say, you do know you can get it cheaper if you get a snack or something. But often to which I'm just like, I'm fine. And they don't get offended.
Yeah.
They don't tell
that was
me
the thing that was the thing that really threw me. Was they came back and were like, I was just trying to save you money.
Look at this guy. He's been living under a rock all his life. He doesn't know how to do buying and selling properly. He hasn't been in a shop in his life. Oh dear. But I have heard, like, the portion sizes are very disproportionate compared to the UK. It's always the meme. Again, I don't know how legitimate it is, but the smallest US size is the largest UK size in terms of refillable drinks and all this sort of thing. Again, I don't know how true that really is, but maybe it is. It's
If it's not literally true, there's I'm sure there's something to it. Just because, like, going back and forth between the US and Japan, that was something that really struck me. Was like, oh, everything is in bigger portions here. But yeah, and again, like, it doesn't compare to the sort of thing that you were talking about with, your experience around Christmas time in Spain. But, That's what I thought of when I thought of like weird aspects of our culture, something that I never would have questioned if I hadn't gone to Japan.
True.
But now that you bring that up, sort of on a related like Christian tradition note, this is something that I think is sort of unique to where I was living in Japan. But oh, I'm gonna blank on the place name, but that's okay. So like not far from the city of Hachinohe, there is sort of a small town that is famous for having the grave of Jesus Christ.
In
And
Japan. What?
in Japan. And the
Oh,
story is the real Jesus Christ switched places with his younger brother who was Japanese, and it was actually his younger brother who died on the cross. And Jesus Christ then went and lived in Japan in the place of his younger Japanese brother, lived out his days and then died, and you can see the monument from the hill where he was buried.
no, I think that's kind of on par of what we're trying to talk about here.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Well,
appropriate.
once I realized what your story was, I was like, oh, that reminds me of the grave of Jesus Christ.
And do people take pilgrimages to this site then?
No, I
No.
honestly, part of me thinks it's a tourist thing.
Okay.
I don't know why it would be, because it's not like a major tourist attraction. I don't think it's something they advertise, so I don't fully understand the story behind it. But I just know that like when I went to Hachinohe, that was one of the things that among the other ALTs, everybody knew, like, oh yeah, they got the grave of Jesus Christ over there.
Like
was like,
the
what?
Jesus Christ. Yeah. The Jesus Christ.
That's right.
Not
Yeah.
just any. The.
Yep. Yep. The whole crucifixion thing was a sham. Yep.
Wow.
Which I am of a more sort of Christian religious persuasion myself. But so the whole idea of that is just sort of absurd and funny to me, because it totally nullifies the whole point of Christianity.
Right. And also it makes that makes the whole resurrection story then. So then it's the brother who has the power of resurrection, not Jesus Christ himself then.
Yeah, apparently. That's what I mean.
Unless they
wrong
both have the
person
power of
died.
resurrection, but then why would he switch with him then? Oh, there's just so many unanswered questions.
The wrong person died for humanity's sin. But if that's the case, then who cares about the actual Jesus Christ who sacrificed never happened? Like, why? What? It doesn't. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, oh wow. Yeah, there's just so many unanswered questions with that.
Yeah. And
That's
I
amazing.
went there on a trip with my dad, because I thought it was just so absurd. And it's this very small place, like nobody's there, or at least nobody was there when I went, and it's sort of out of the way. It looks like it's nicely maintained, but again, it's not very big. And when you go there, there's this big sign for like, hey, you go down the road this way, you get to the pyramid. And I was like,
Wow.
what's the pyramid? It's like they've like transplanted a pyramid out of Egypt or something. And we tried to track it down. I don't think we successfully found it, but that would have been crazy too.
That it kind of reminds me of like that idea of like how and I'm going with somewhere with this. Just bear with me. Like the whole idea of that anything can be art. And there was a case in I think it was in San Francisco where two teenagers or two young were in a museum in an art gallery, and one of them took off their glasses and left
Oh,
it
yeah.
in the corner of the room, and then everyone started taking photographs of it. I think it was as a
As an
an
exhibit.
art installation. So it feels like to me
Yeah.
like somebody has just like graffitied somewhere in Japan. Oh, Jesus Christ was here, and everyone's like, that is the legitimate grave of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was pretty unbelievable.
Wow, that's amazing. And the fact, yeah, that feels really bad. Whoever came up with it, and then the fact it's not a major tourist attraction. If there's not
Right.
many people who go to it, that makes it even worse. They went to all that effort,
Yeah.
putting all the signs up and everything, putting out a nice spread for people, and then the people didn't come. They didn't buy it. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, nobody's even heard of it outside of this specific region.
And again, now I'm getting more questions. So wait, if his brother was Japanese, then how does that work exactly?
That
Are
part
they- are-
just doesn't make any sense.
are
That's just
they-
some sort of wishful thinking.
Are they half
I don't
brothers
know.
then?
I don't know how they're going to explain the idea. They must be that must be the idea, is that somehow they're half brothers, and this Japanese guy was just in the Roman world. Like it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, yeah, poor Mary, having to be, the virgin, the virgin mother and all. Imagine then
Hmm.
saying to her husband, "Oh, it's happened again."
Well, I don't know. I don't know the brother's story. Maybe it wasn't another virgin conception. I don't know.
Oh, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's wild.
I have to leave a link to that. I have to find the page for it and leave a link for it in the
I'll try.
comments.
I'll
People
try
check
and
it out.
track it down for. I'll try and track it down for you. It might be in Japanese, but I'll try and track
That's
it down for you.
amazing. That wasn't what I had in mind, because that's not an everyday thing. But that's still that is very weird. Again, if you explain it, that just seems very strange. Okay.
Yeah, and the more that you think about it, the weirder it gets
Yeah.
as you experienced yourself.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can't top that. I think that makes Kagateo seem very normal, to be honest. I'm trying to. Oh man. I think even about like the UK, I'm trying to think like trying to explain to people here that we're very obsessed with sending, birthday and Christmas. I say birthday and Christmas cards. Not just we send cards for everything in
Oh
the
wow.
UK. We send, yeah. If you're pregnant, you get a card. If you've changed job, you get a card. If you pass your driving test, you get a card. You pass any of your exams, you get a card. What else? If you're sick, you get a card. If it's Easter, you get a card. Literally anything to give somebody a card, you'll give them a card.
Oh,
And there are shops that literally only sell nothing but cards. Whereas
oh,
here, you
that's
have to try
interesting.
to go into a stationery shop, and you might find this tiny little stand that'll have a few
Hmm.
cards, and that's it. That's your lot. Yeah, trying to convince people of that is quite unusual. How does it work in the States? Do you
Well,
have?
birthday cards are super common, and then there are other like specific dates. So like things like graduation, or certain holidays. Christmas cards definitely a thing. Um, so there are like specific occasions on which you'll send cards, but it's pretty rare. You don't typically send a lot of cards. Like passing a driver's test, no way, not a chance.
I had
It
it.
sounds like they're much more prevalent in the UK.
I had it when my wife and I moved recently. My mum sent me a card over that said, "Congratulations, you've moved home."
Wow. Yeah, we wouldn't do that for moving houses either. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's a little bit different now because obviously with the younger generation, we don't keep address books in the same way like maybe parents'
Hmm.
generation did. So there's a lot more electronic based stuff now and just chatting normally. But yeah. I saw a thing on Instagram today, and I was going to ask you about it. I was going to send it to you and see if you agreed. But I'm going to say it out on the podcast. It was a person comparing birthday cards in the US and birthday cards in the UK. So all the
Hmm.
ones in the US were really, really nice. Happy 60th birthday, congratulations, hope you have a lovely day. All like nice flowers and birthday presents on the cover and all this sort of stuff. And we have them
Hmm.
in the UK too. But then in the UK, there's also a different type of birthday card, which have very insulting messages on them. Things like, "Oh, happy birthday, you're 1 year closer to the grave," and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, we
Uh,
have those. We have those in the States as well. Like,
okay.
I don't think it's fair to draw a particularly strong like line between the two there, because
Oh,
there's like lines of cards that specialize in that sort of thing in the States as well.
oh, okay. So I was fooled. Instagram tricked me.
Yep, an Instagram trick.
Oh man. Okay, that's a shame. But good to have cleared
gotta
that up.
gotta check
Don't
these
believe
things.
what you say
Yeah,
on Instagram, folks. Yeah. I mean, there probably
yeah.
are other
I'm
things.
I'm a
Off the
little.
top of my head, I can't think of any more. I'll probably think of more once we
That's
stop recording. We'll have to add them as we go along, I think.
that's the problem. Yeah, maybe this can be like an ongoing thing where we like reevaluate things from our own cultures.
Hmm.
I do want to say though, on the subject of cars, I'm a little bit jealous because one of my hobbies is messing about with like fountain pens and stationery supplies and things like that, and that would be a great excuse to actually put some of those things to
To
use
use.
for other people. Yeah.
Hmm.
I do my own journaling, right? Which is fun, and I get to keep my own journals, and that's sort of the main way I experience this hobby. But it would be interesting to have an excuse to just send people stuff in the mail all the time with my like fancy inks and things.
I would like the imagine like what's it called? Like stationery that has your name as the title, so everybody knows that it's from a rook.
Mm-hmm.
Like personalized stationery and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
fountain pens. I mean, I don't know. Are you left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed.
Okay, so yeah, this might be a left-handed problem, but I mean, any sort of quill or fountain pen I find very hard to use. I'm gonna just blame it on the fact it's left-handed. It's not built for left-handed people. That might not be true, but that's my excuse that I'm going with. Because we can't.
Yeah, I do.
It's very difficult for left-handed people to like also hold pens, probably because of like the way that left-handed people write compared to right-handed people. Because it's going in the unnatural direction for writing.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard that it's harder for left-handed people to get into that sort of thing. So I think that's very real. I know it's not impossible because there are people in the like fountain pen hobby that talk about the way that they're able to do it. And I think there are some pens that are friendlier for people who write left-handed. Also, certain inks, right? Certain inks take a long time to dry on the page, and other inks dry very quickly. This also depends on the paper. It's like what you need is a pen and ink combination that gives you the sort of dry time that you're looking for. And so people who are left-handed tend to gravitate towards a paper and ink combination that will dry very quickly so that they can write over and it doesn't smudge everything as they're writing.
Yeah.
But as I understand it, there's actually like two different left-handed styles. One is called overwriting, and the other is called underwriting. And a left-handed underwriter, I think, is the common wisdom anyway, is that a left-handed underwriter is going to have a better time adjusting to fountain pens than an overwriter. So
I assume when you say over and under is based upon the position of your hand relative to the nib.
to the line that you're writing, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm definitely an overwriter.
Yeah.
It's also just the action, right? When you're a right-handed person, because we write from left to right,
Mm-hmm.
the hand goes first and the pen just follows the hand.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with left-handed people, you're having to push the pen in the direction that you want it to go, rather than just letting it sort of drag behind your hand. So it creates it is awkward. Like, I've got that issue all the time. Well, even when I was with pencil, when I used to write with pencil in primary and secondary school, I'd come back home at night and I don't know what it's called, like the little side of your hand that's on like the pinky side of your hand would just be completely grey with the graphite, smudging and stuff. And then with pens, like I use a brand called Bic because it dries very quickly. But the problem is, especially with red pen, it doesn't sort of jump off the page very well, especially if the piece of paper is not completely white. If it's got some sort of like squares or whatever, you got like other colors in it, it doesn't leap off the page. Whereas if I use another one where the red is more visible, or even if it's black ink or if it's more visible, it takes ages to dry. And the number of times I smudge, and it's so infuriating. It's it's hard.
I will say from a like mechanical like pushing perspective sort of thing, as opposed to just the wetness, dryness of the ink and the paper combination thing. But in terms of like the difficulty of manipulating the pen itself with your hand, fountain pens are really, really nice and smooth. So that is one advantage that I think people have claimed, not just for left-handed, but just in general. If you find that you write with like a death grip, or that you have to press down really hard to get something to write, you can relieve all of that pressure by switching to a fountain pen because the inks flow much more easily. And depending on how quickly it dries, right? It's something that people will like actively rate on fountain pen inks because it's this whole like hobby community. So if you're specifically looking for a quick drying ink on a quick drying paper, so you can make your life easier and then also have that nice sort of flowing experience, you may be able to put together a combination that could work for you. But again, I don't really know that much about it because I'm not left-handed. I haven't had to work out that aspect of the hobby. I've been sort of fortunate in that regard. I can just go with the more prevalent right-handed side of things.
Right. Yeah, you have no idea. Being a minority, it's so hard.
I have no idea.
As we talked about being a minority in the first episode, I think it was.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
I remember that. I was just recalling when you said that. I was like, yeah, we did touch on that, like the weird ways in which being a minority sort of does and doesn't manifest, and how it's different for different sorts of minorities, even.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's not something that you'd naturally think about, but the whole world is devised in a right-handed way. So yeah, it can be a bit frustrating, but fortunately there are more tools now for left-handed people to use. But yeah, I do find if I'm writing a lot, I don't write as much as I used to because a lot of it's computer-based. But
Mm-hmm.
especially now, it also works because I don't write as much as I used to. If I do write
Mm-hmm.
quite a lot, my hand gets quite tired, just
Mm-hmm.
because of that. I do have a little bit of a death grip, and I'm doing it over. Not as bad as some people, but I do have like an overwrite, I guess, and it's not the most comfortable. And my writing's terrible then, especially since I've left school. I'm like, who cares? Nobody's gonna read my writing anyway, so I just write these horrific notes that
Yeah.
I think they're not too bad, but maybe it's only when other people come to read my writing they're like, what? Especially here, because the way that certain letters are joined up and are formed are slightly
Mm.
differently.
Mm-hmm.
I end up having quite a lot of arguments with people here about even how to write the number 7 and the number 4. We do it in
Mm-hmm.
different ways.
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, it can cause a bit of confusion. Um, yeah, I can either
Yeah.
write quickly or write well. I can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the situation, I have to pick one. But
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I sort of had to retrain myself. Well, I didn't have to. I wanted to. I decided to retrain myself to write in cursive and completely altered my grip, completely altered the way that I write because one of the things that I found was writing in print, which is how I used to write everything, is my wrist would get tired very quickly, even
right,
with a fountain pen. And so I was like, well, I want to do these. I want to keep these journals that involves writing for, not a super long period of time, but half an hour to an hour is not unusual. So, in order to make that feasible, I had to like shift the way that I write to involve more of my arm and less of my wrist.
right.
And you can do that with cursive. So, I sort of retrained myself cursive after I completely forgot. I learned it in school growing up and then just never used it. And why would I? The whole world's electronic.
Hmm.
But once I started to decide, okay, I want to get into this as a hobby and just do it for my own fun and fulfillment, then I can sort of retrain myself to, use my arm and relearn cursive and do all this stuff. And yeah, so it's been an interesting experience, sort of going from that. And now I'm sort of starting to learn, they call it like broad edge calligraphy. So there's the style of calligraphy where like you have a flex nib and you can, depending on when you press down, you can get thinner or thicker lines. And that's sort of its own broad group of calligraphy styles. And then there's another broad group of calligraphy styles, which is just you've got a really broad nib on the edge of your pen. And depending on what angle you hold it at, you can get variations of thickness and thinness as you create the letters in very specific ways. And so I've been very, very slowly working on a variation of foundational hand based off of this book that I bought to help teach me calligraphy. So that's sort of my latest project, and it's been teaching me to approach the alphabet in an entirely different way all over again. And I imagine that's going to be an ongoing experience as I try and learn new calligraphy alphabets. Is everyone has its own different way of writing, different order to the strokes, different way that they're supposed to look, different balances between like the empty spaces in between the letters and all this other stuff you have to keep in mind.
Wow. I feel so inadequate. There's me trying to just string one sentence together in terms of trying to make it look remotely readable.
Well, I think the real takeaway is it doesn't really matter, right? It's
Wow.
all everyone's just gonna type everything anyway, right?
Wow, that's the thing. Yeah.
Who cares? Like I can do it because it's fun for me. If it's not fun for you, don't bother.
Mm. It's so when you think about it, it's kind of depressing. We lose that personality by not seeing the way that you write and handwritten letters and all this sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I did come across something today because, I like to, I'm into fountain pens and inks and things like that as a hobby. So I've got my internet set up to give me like different posts on Reddit and things like that that'll come up and um, be either inspiration or information or something along those lines. One of them was talking about how, like, a lot of people, when they get into fountain pens, want to change their writing like I did. And their whole argument was like, no, like, listen, however you write is personal to you, and you shouldn't change that. You should accept that this is your style. And I liked that. I think
Hmm.
you've got your style, I've got mine, and that personality comes out on the page if you're going to write something physically.
I would call I would call my writing style a style. It's just me getting by.
I do think there is something to be said for like a deliberate choice of a style as opposed to just trying to scribble something down. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know.
The, the thing
I'm pretty open when it
the
comes to
thing
that sort of thing.
the thing I'm really impressed by is when you hear about like journalist shorthand and all this sort of thing.
Oh
The fact
yeah.
that they got all these like little codes and the way that they write things, and then they're able to sort of then transcribe, is that the word, or like translate their notes back into proper English or proper whatever language it is afterwards. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I agree. I've never thought about learning shorthand, but maybe in like 10 years, if I'm still
That'll be
looking
your
to
next project.
expand my writing hobbies, I'll move on to that or something.
It's like when I wrote a comment on one of your on the translation born video, and it was just
Hmm.
one little sentence you did, and I just then changed one of the words, right, to make it relevant for Fear of Dracula. I had
Hmm.
to listen to you say that sentence about 10 times for me to make sure I got every single word, because I was
Oh
so
yeah.
slow. I was trying to type it, which didn't help. I should have
Yep.
written it down by hand. It would have been much quicker, but still, yeah.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've done that on several videos where I think, oh, I just want to quote this. I think I
Quote.
left one on your latest video where you were like,
Yeah.
I just hate combat in this game. It's so frustrating. Is the extent of what you were saying. And I had to like go back and listen to that like 5 times because it was be like, okay, there's those 2 words. I'm gonna type that. And then you're tempted. Your mind just puts in words
Yeah.
to get across the same idea. But if you're actually trying to quote someone, you have to be like, no, that's not what they said. I need to go back and listen to the tape again.
Yeah. And then it's just you put all that effort into a comment that will take 2 seconds to read, and then they'll
Yep.
just give you the the heart emoji, and that'll be it.
Yep. And that's all. Yep.
uh, so yeah, I think that's gonna have to be a topic that we'll have to come back to. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna have to ask my wife, because again, as a foreigner, you see things in a slightly different way. You
Hmm.
see the weird. I mean, I'm thinking about language stuff as well in terms of vocabulary and things. Weird connections between words and whatever. But again, you're kind of more sensitive to things because you're doing it from
Hmm.
the perspective of you're learning it for the first time, not being brought up with something. And it's only
Yep.
then again when you return. I'm trying to think anything else. I've been back to Scotland recently. Uh, no, there are cultural differences, but they're not like cultural aspects.
Hmm.
Again, it's not a very nice thing to talk about. I'm not saying it in a way to try to damn people or whatever, or condemning them in some way. I'm not saying it like that. But we talked about before the sort of the food differences
Hmm.
between Mediterranean diet, especially Spain, and then the UK. I won't speak for the US, but I think you'd probably agree with me on certain things, and how the level of processed food here is still high, but it's not as high as the UK. There's still more emphasis on family sort of settings for food and home cooked food and all this sort of thing, and sharing salads. I notice the extent of overweight people and obesity
Hmm.
is just so obvious. And
Hmm.
again, and I'm not doing it to condemn people. It's a a huge societal problem, and it has to be we have to try and find ways of dealing with it with compassion and humility and humanity about it. Because it's not as simple as just say, oh, look at all these greedy people. That's not the case.
Right.
It's a huge underlying there are lots of factors which are causing it to happen.
True.
Um, but it's just so obvious when I returned to Scotland. I was like, good grief. Um,
Hmm.
but then when I've spoken to people here who have lived here, for say 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they've said that they have noticed the difference here.
Yep.
And, and so if I'm shocked between Spain now and Scotland now, then it might be even a bigger shock if had it been 20 years ago. But then Scotland would have also been lower rates as well at that point. I mean, you must have
The
maybe seen the
past.
same with Japan and America, perhaps, or maybe not so much, or.
Yeah, you just brought to mind a quote I heard recently. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there,
Mm,
which, um, you know,
that's
it's
perfect. Yeah.
the same sort of thing, right? 20 years ago, you have a different rate of obesity, right? But anyway, Yeah, it's definitely similar in Japan and the States. And if you're contrasting the two, that's sort of one of the things. Actually, when I initially went over to Japan, that was like one of the premier things that people were talking about. I don't know how this became such like a major topic. I guess food was sort of getting reevaluated in general in the U.S. There's been I want to say like a 20 or so year movement in the States recently where people have been sort of been going back to home cooking and looking at some of those, like you were talking about, some of the larger underlying factors that can explain the rise of obesity and overweight and sort of questioning of the traditional knowledge of what makes people obese, what actually is healthy food and what isn't. And I think to some extent that's still a somewhat controversial topic.
Hmm.
But I think it's part of this ongoing thing that's been happening in the States. And I think I was sort of on the cusp or the forefront of that stuff happening when I was going to Japan. And so that's one of the things that people would often comment on was like it's very rare to see someone who's overweight in Japan. And another similar point that is that similarly, people in Japan would be like, "Oh yeah, everyone's so much more overweight now than they were before."
Yeah, it's
Uh,
funny, isn't it?
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think it's always different when you're living in the country, right? You have a different perspective, so it just gives you that whole thing of like, "Oh yeah, like things are worse now."
Hmm.
And some of that is just, I think, inherent to humans. I think there's some
Right.
aspect of being a person and growing up that something about you thinks the past is better.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily always the case, but
Sentimentality and nostalgia, but we also, I don't know if it's the same expression, say like you see everything through rose-tinted glasses. You
yeah,
see the
that one's the
past
same.
through, that lens of you're younger and maybe more optimistic about life, so you see things in a different way, and then as you get older, you become more, pessimistic or maybe more realistic, maybe a little bit more conservative, or it just depends on, or maybe the things you are talking about is generally true, but it's just funny, yeah, just depending on the context, yeah. The past was always better, when a lot of the
Hmm.
times it wasn't. It depends on what we're
Hmm.
talking about. I think in terms of
Yeah.
health, health is tricky. In terms of medicine and stuff, yes. But in terms of general diet, I'd say no.
Hmm.
That's just my gut feeling. In terms of other aspects, again, it's yes and no. It just depends on how you view things. And again, it's also another political thing. Like politics kind of transcends a lot of topics.
Yeah,
It's
it
kind of
really
hard to keep it
does.
out of it. But then, yeah, ideology will play a huge part in terms of how you see certain things.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, but I definitely think there is that difference, which is sort of, and I don't know how much it influences it one way or the other, but I think it has to have some influence. Is that sort of food culture that I was talking about, like way back in the first episode in Japan, where
hmm,
everybody is much more focused on, okay, this is what's fresh, this is what's seasonal, this is what's, this, that, or the other thing. And I think some of these things have sort of become like buzzwords in the States. I see a lot of things about like eating seasonally and eating locally and eating fresh and being in with these like natural rhythms. And uh, it sort of feels a little bit buzzwordy to me.
hmm,
Um, Whereas in Japan, you have all of that stuff and it feels very natural because, like I said, like you go on vacation somewhere and one of the things they'll talk to you about is, hey, this is our local like hyper specific food specialty, right? It's like, oh, you're
hmm,
in Hachinohe, we're all about squid, right? That's like on their like tourism
right,
advertisements and things. And it just feels like a lot more natural part of the culture. And Japan has this thing. It's a little bit stereotypical, but there's some truth to it. Japan has this thing with the four seasons, and it always has, right? You go back, you look at the traditional art from 1,000 years ago, and it's like, oh, depictions through the four seasons on these like different panes of a like folding screen, and it's sort of a classical theme. And one of the ways that that manifests in modern culture is, okay, it's this season, so you're going to eat this food. And I don't know, there's something about the way that when I was living in Japan, it felt a little bit more like ingrained into the culture. Whereas I feel like that's sort of it's sort of in an early stage in the States where people are trying to be more mindful, maybe introduce more of that food culture. Whereas in Japan, it's a more like matured thing that's sort of permeated more layers of their society.
right. I mean, if the states are anything like the UK, it can't help that type of movement where you're trying to get people to eat more regional and local and seasonal. It can't be helped by the fact that because of globalization and economies of scale and things, we just become so accustomed to having everything all year round.
Yeah.
Britain imports, I don't know what percentage, but the percentage will be very, very high in terms of its fruit and veg from other countries like Spain because they got a better climate or whatever.
Hmm.
And yeah, like take something like asparagus as a random example. In the
Hmm.
UK, the asparagus season does exist, but it's incredibly short.
Hmm.
Um, whereas you can buy asparagus almost all year round because you then import it from other countries where it's maybe grown more often, or they store it in huge warehouses over the year and all this sort of thing. So I think we've kind of become too used to the idea that you can have anything anytime you want. So
Hmm.
then that's quite hard then to maybe break afterwards and be like, okay, let's try and do it in a more sort of restrained local way. I don't know.
Hmm.
It just again depends on the person, right? And it's in Spain, yeah. I mean, like I don't know. I don't think that there's many countries, at least again. Okay, I'll say I'll use the word developed, right? Very
Hmm.
few developed countries are gonna be exempt from this problem because, or if you call it a problem, fine, or this situation, let's say, because it might not be a problem. Depends on how you view it, I suppose.
Hmm.
Um, um, because of just they're all part of this global economy and all this sort of thing.
Hmm.
Especially within Europe, where you've got this single market of countries and just things can go across borders so easily. I
Right.
mean, you can walk into a shop here and buy French cheese and Italian olives and German sausages, whatever. It's just so easy to do.
Hmm.
Um,
And that's the thing,
um,
right? It's not like it's all bad, right?
no,
It's easy to come down on it like, oh, the modern diet, it's gone completely out of control and everything is international now and we got all these problems and nobody's eating local and it's like, yeah, but there's all sorts of benefits to having these things locally available. It's sort of a miracle that you can have as much stuff available throughout the year as you have.
yeah,
And there are real ways in which people benefit from that. But there are also other ways that it can be detrimental. And that makes it complicated. And it's really hard. It's really hard to deal with issues that are so complex in a complex and suitable way.
right, exactly. And even if you do try to deal with them, you're not going to change the world order and sort of the way the world works overnight, right?
Yeah.
Globalization is still going to exist, whatever it is. Capitalism is still going to exist, all this sort of stuff, right? So you can't just suddenly, reset and start again. That's just never going to happen.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I don't know what it's like in the States, but most kids that grew up in, say, the 1970s and 80s in Britain basically had to eat mince and potatoes. That was their
Hmm.
diet for the whole of their childhood. You can't say to me that they were better off than we are now with, the
Hmm.
choice of products that you have. But again, it's kind of like it has to be a certain responsibility and transparency about it. It just depends on what it is. Yeah, it's also nice too when you go traveling and you can then find local delicacies that still haven't made it to
Hmm.
the big supermarkets or have been exported international. Like, or we talked about like we talked about sushi a couple of podcasts ago, right? Where you didn't like
Hmm.
sushi in America because it wasn't like the authentic thing, even though it was maybe marketed as such, or it's the thing that you'd
Well,
expect. The minute you go
they
to
do the
Japan,
best.
it's a different story, right?
They do the best they can in the States. It's just they
Right.
can't do it the way Japan does.
Exactly right. So you're always going to have that where even if certain things do get exported, you can't replicate them exactly. But then if you go to the origin, the source of that, whatever it is, the dish or a certain ingredient or whatever, then you'll have a different experience. Um,
Yep, it's very true.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how well this works, but it seems to me like it's a good transition point to another topic you have on our list here about eat out versus cooking habits.
Yeah, it was just I think I can't remember now exactly how it came up, but you were mentioning something on the previous podcast, and I was like, oh, I wanted to ask about just more in terms. I think we talked about food a little bit, of course, but more in terms of the how common is we would call it takeaway in the UK, or going to restaurants is not takeaway, but yeah, I said eat
Hmm.
out to apply both of those things. How common
Right.
in both the states and Japan is takeaway or eat out culture. I mean, we kind of joke I mean, I don't know if he's done it recently, but it used to be a joke with your friend Strider. He'd always be messaging us from some sort of, drive-through establishment. Like,
Yeah.
it's not just him. I see it with influencers on Instagram and stuff. It always seems they do all their videos in their car outside of a Wendy's or a Starbucks or whatever, right?
Hmm.
And whereas that there are drive-throughs in the UK, but not to the same extent. And then I didn't know in terms of Japan, how often do people eat out in restaurants? Is it a thing that is very common? Do people prefer to stay in to eat? Is it takeaway? Are you talking about how I've even seen it on like that jet lag game where they have vending machines with maybe
Oh yeah.
pre-cooked meals and all this sort of stuff. So that was why I
Hmm.
wanted to quickly ask about.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit tricky for me to evaluate this because I was living on my own in Japan. I wasn't living with a Japanese family.
Okay,
Um, I did live with a Japanese family when I studied abroad before I ended up going to Japan to work when I was in college. And the experience I had when I was staying with the Japanese family is that most people, or I shouldn't say most people, the family that I was staying with, most meals were home cooked.
right.
And that would include, like, there's a whole tradition of mom getting up super early, like 4 or 5 in the morning, so that they can make a boxed lunch for their kid to take to school and or do something with. Which there's also school lunch, which is another sort of cultural difference, which is the school provides a sort of set meal that the kids are responsible for preparing and serving. They do the final legwork anyway. They don't like cook the food themselves, but they'll portion it out on these like trays and everything, and push their desks together and have lunch together in the classroom,
Oh
which is
wow.
very
Oh,
different.
so not in a canteen then?
Right? Yeah, I was gonna say it's very
Oh.
different than in the States where we all go to the cafeteria.
Oh right. Sorry. Yeah, we say canteen in British English. We don't say
Yeah.
cafeteria. See, okay, but yeah, instead of having a separate hall to eat, you actually eat in the classroom. That's cool.
Yep. They eat right there in the classroom, and all the different, they come in with the meal cart, and then different kids have different roles in the process that will like shift from day to day, and they portion out different things, and then they ask if anyone wants additional um, additional things to eat, and yeah, it's a whole thing, and it's kind of funny because so the word for this sort of school lunch that they have in the classroom that the kids serve in Japan is kyushoku. And for me, I would always just translate that as school lunch. And I remember I was talking with someone in Japan and they were like, "So I've heard you don't have kyushoku in the US. Is that true?" And I was like, "Oh no, we have school lunch. It's just that we go to the cafeteria. We don't eat it in the classroom, and it's like we have people who are paid to dish out the portions, and it's not like as involved with the kids." And they were like, "Oh, okay, so I was right. They don't have kyushoku." And I was like, "I guess if you very narrowly define that word, then yeah." But yeah, that's a bit more of an aside. But to go back to the sort of main point was that most meals I had when I was staying with a host family were home cooked, and every now and then we would go out for a special occasion. Like they would like to surprise me with certain like premier Japanese foods that are particularly different from what you could expect from the States. So we would go out for okonomiyaki, where most of the restaurants you end up cooking the food yourself. You can have someone come over and prepare it for you like an actual, so you get the proper experience of the meal.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you can also sort of cook it. A lot of these sort of highlight meals that this particular family wanted to take me to were this sort of cook it yourself variety, where it's like, okay, okonomiyaki, there's this big like pan in the middle of the table, it's like a big griddle surface, um, and you just cook on that, and then you get to eat the thing that you cook yourself. Or we'd go to shabu shabu, where they sit you down and it's this boiling either water or like soup stock or something like that that you then dip. meat and vegetables that are very thinly sliced into to cook it yourself and then dip it into a sauce and then eat that. Or you go to I think they call it Korean barbecue in English, where you go and they've got like a grill in the central position with a vent over it, and you cook the meat and the vegetables straight on the grill right at your table inside a restaurant. So those were all sort of the like premier. Let's expose this guy to how people eat these things in Japan, where they cook everything themselves, even though they're eating out. Um, so
That,
those were like the highlights that I remember. Go ahead.
if you remember in the previous podcast, you talked about the people who like, from your perspective, because you're a different type of person, right? That people who go camping, but just go
Yeah.
camping to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And your reaction to it was, if you just want to go camping and be comfortable, why do you just stay at home then? So that
Yep.
seems like the same thing for me. Is like, if you have to go to the restaurant and cook the food yourself, why do you just stay at home and cook?
Yeah. Well, the
That
thing
kind.
is, a lot of the time they will cook those meals at home as well, but the cleanup is really arduous.
Right, okay.
So
So
they
it's
tend
cooking
not
without the
to,
washing up then.
yeah, they tend
Okay.
not to have to worry about that when they're at a restaurant. Plus, it's super easy. Like when I'm talking about you're grilling your own like meats or dipping them in water or whatever, like shabu shabu is literally, remember we talked about onomatopoeia. It's an onomatopoeia for swish swish. And it's that way because the meat's like so thinly sliced. You pick it up in your chopsticks, you give it a couple swishes in the hot boiling water, you dip it
That's
in the
it.
sauce and you eat it, right? It's
Wow.
super fast. So you don't feel like you're cooking.
Are most restaurants in Japan, even if you're not, it's including the ones that you don't have to cook the food yourself, are
Yeah.
they? Oh, is the kitchen open? Are the chefs in really close contact with the guests, with the customers? Can you
It
see everything that
depends
they're
on the
doing?
restaurant. It depends on the restaurant. So there's a wide variety of them. There are some where you can see into the kitchen. I would say they're a minority.
Okay.
Most of the time, they're not cooking the food in front of you. Uh, Family restaurants, you're never going to see anyone cooking the food in front of you. In fact, you have like a little push button where you can call someone over when you're ready to order, right? They don't like come just check in on your table after so many minutes.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
yeah, very handy. And so the you never see the kitchen there. Um, Most fast food places, they won't like the kitchen will be attached to like a central port. So in a typical like Japanese fast food style place, it will be like there's a counter with a lot of seats that goes around the inside of the restaurant, and on the inside of that counter is where the people are working, and they'll like bring out your food out to you, and directly behind the portion where the people are walking around to serve you is where they have the kitchen, so you can see it but it's not exactly on display.
Okay. I think that's a thing that's more common over here then. There seems to be a bit of a trend where they like to have open kitchens. So
Mm.
the guests can see, not that they're right beside them, they can literally see what they're doing, but in terms of, there isn't a complete wall between the dining room and the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
They can see the chefs moving around and doing things. Quite a lot of restaurants will have the kitchen area as you walk in, and you walk
Mm-hmm.
past the kitchen to get to your table. So as you literally walking past, you can see all the chefs and almost say like hello to them as you're walking past. Again,
Oh,
depends on the
that's
size of
interesting.
restaurant and size and style and stuff. There will be a lot which will
Wow.
have that closed kitchen. There's a Japanese restaurant close to where we live where they've got an area upstairs where they've got like a little bar and you see two chefs preparing the sushi and things, but
Mm-hmm.
all then the hot food is prepared in another kitchen that you can't see, and it all comes up through like the little like lift up to the different levels of the restaurant. So again,
Interesting.
depends on space, depends on what facilities are available, but yeah,
Yeah.
there are quite a lot now which is sort of open kitchen. But
Interesting. Yeah, there
yeah,
was one place that I would go to for lunch a lot of the time. It was like my favorite sort of diner style establishment in Japan, where it was a seating area in sort of the main room, and the kitchen was just in a corner, and it wasn't really closed off. It was, there was a counter set up in front of it that people could eat at, but especially if you ate at the counter, you could watch them cook everything if you wanted to.
hmm.
Um, but again, it wasn't like it didn't strike me as sort of a presentation. This place sort of felt like it was a family who lived above their family restaurant, and there was an old woman and an old man who ran the place, and it's just they made it work by sort of remodeling their house, and so the kitchen just had to be there.
Right. I like it though. It's a little bit of like soulmanship, right? And there's that connection between the preparation of the food and the customers. And you just like, I love it when you go into like Italian restaurants and they've got the old sort of like not like a normal, oven that you'd find in the house, but the what are they called now? Oh, this is awful. I can't remember the word. Like the round sort of stone ovens, which have like a proper fire
Oh,
inside.
okay. So like a brick
Uh,
oven?
yeah, like a brick oven, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And seeing that and seeing them throw the pizzas in, and then within, a few minutes, because that's often like, they'll rise really quickly and whatever, and then you see them taking it out and whatever. It's really nice to watch, and just, even if you don't watch it exactly from your table, you still
Hmm.
see it as you walk in and you know it's happening. I think it's a really nice thing to have.
Yeah, yeah. There was a chain of pizza places in this area that was set up like that for a while, and
Mhm.
I agree. I always liked that. I don't think there are any of them left. I think the pandemic shut them all down, but I could be wrong.
It's a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah.
I find it quite interesting. Again, maybe it might be an internet trend thing. I don't know how often normal people do it, but as a personal rule for me, I cannot find anything more uncomfortable than eating food in a car. That's like the last place that
Ah,
I want to be eating. Like the idea of going to a drive-through and then sitting in the car park and eating. Okay, if it's something small like a sandwich, okay, but eating, something I cannot. That would just drive me nuts. I need to sit at a table and have it.
I
I
agree
don't
with
enjoy
you.
eating in a car.
I agree with you, but I feel like I'm an outlier in the States.
I
I
think
feel
you're
like
living in the
most
wrong
people.
country, Rook. I think you need to move over here.
Well, I will say, uh, and this might be influenced by one of the questions that you've had on the list for a long time that we haven't fully gotten to. Um, uh, because I learned a lot about Japan before I went to live there. But I will say the country that I felt sort of most at home at was Japan.
Interesting.
It was like the way that people naturally do things there felt very natural to me.
Hmm.
And I've been learning about Japanese culture for basically my entire life up to that point. Not literally, but
Yeah.
very,
Within
very long
within
time.
reason, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I discovered anime and video games and all these things that came from Japan when I was very young, right? And I studied all about it in college and I tried to learn about it as much as I could in high school. And so, I knew a lot before I went to Japan. But there was a certain amount of stuff about the way they did things in Japan that just made sense to me. Like that whole thing I was talking about earlier, where when you're at a family restaurant, they don't have someone who just is like, "Hey, I'm your waiter," and they like come and check in with you every now and then. Um, they don't do that. It's just, oh, you're ready to order? Like press the button and they'll come over and they'll take your order and they'll go and then they'll bring it out when it's done and that's that. And if you need anything else, you can always ring them again. And that felt so much more natural to me than trying to because I'm fairly shy. I think I mentioned that before. Trying to socialize with someone while I'm having a meal and really I just want them to bring me my food.
Sure. You came for food, you didn't come for a chat.
That's right. And to be fair, I have had wonderful people on wait staff who really did seem like genuine and open and friendly and that it was fun for me to interact with. So I have had some very positive experiences in the American way of doing things. But by and large, as a general rule, if I'm going to a restaurant and I'm having a meal or something like that, I look at it as a very transactional thing. And so I'm totally fine to have that sort of anonymous, very polite and to the point sort of service. I was just like, oh, this is the way it should work. There's no tipping.
Oh well,
There's
that's
you
another
just
that's another thing too. Because in the states, is that huge thing about tipping now. Yeah.
yeah. I hate tipping so much. It's just an excuse to underpay people and
Ugh, yeah. In the UK, tipping is a thing, but it's not compulsory.
uh,
The issue I've got now is a lot of places are being really cheeky, and I really hate it. Is that on your bill they will put on, and they say it's an optional 10% service charge
mhm.
tip, basically. Uh, it's optional, but they automatically add it to the bill. And it's this really weird, horrible interaction when the waiter or the waitress will come over eventually when they see you with your card in your hand ready to pay. And they'll be like, "Are you okay with this 10%? Like, what are you going to say? No?"
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
hate that.
awful.
And I'm not, I hate confrontation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I spend all day thinking about what I would say to somebody in an argument. But when it comes to the moment, I just don't have any guts at all. And I just hate that. And I just want a life without conflict. And I
Yeah.
would hate to say to somebody, no, I'm not happy with this. But I am genuinely not happy about it, and it really annoys me now. We went to London a couple of years ago, and we saw this, and we were like, "What on earth?" And the only places where that don't really do it are pubs. Some maybe higher end pubs will do it, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of pubs don't. So we're like, "That's it. We'll only go to pubs from now on." But then now they've started doing it in Edinburgh and in Manchester. I'm just like, "Oh my goodness, what is going on here?"
That's
It's just
ridiculous.
so awkward all round. It's not even tipping. It's, oh, we'll add it automatically onto the bill for you.
Yeah.
You can take it off if you want, but then you have to talk to the manager. Like, oh, don't do this to me, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's like, well, I don't mind paying 10% more for my food. Just put up your prices by 10%. I know what will
Yeah.
happen. They won't get people going into the restaurant, right? But you're
Yep.
basically
That's the problem.
you're making the meal 10% more expensive than it needs to be. If I
Yep.
go out for a meal, but I know it's going to cost me 10% more than before, I'm making that conscious choice. But don't,
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, don't you dare, advertise a certain price for food and then whack it up by 10%. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay, like, I'm complaining, it's only me and my wife. What happens if it's a family who are going out? Right?
Yep.
And that's their treat or whatever, right? And you're suddenly going, oh yeah, we're just going to whack up 10% on top. A lot of families or people cannot afford that right now. I don't know what's like in the States, but in the UK, as an example, there's a bit of a cost of living crisis going on. People can't afford it. I mean, they can't even afford to go out to eat a lot of the time anyway, let alone something
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, we're going to put 10% more. I know times are tough for everybody, but I think it's just kind of ridiculous. It's done in this very sort of, very, very sly way, which I just
Yeah.
really don't like at all. If I'm going to tip
Yeah.
you, I will tip you.
Mm-hmm.
But
Because
you
what they'll do,
don't make the decision for me.
in the States is they will print out like suggestions, right? So they'll come with your receipt and it'll be like, oh, if you want to tip 10%, here's the amount we calculated for you. 15%, here's the amount we calculated for you. 20%, here's the amount we calculated for you. And you can you can just like follow their math to fill it in. And to be fair, there are certain like restaurants and not just certain restaurants, but it's fairly standard, I believe, that over a certain amount, tips become mandatory. And so
Yeah,
it's just like, okay, you've ordered a huge amount of food, so we're just going to throw on our automatic, 10-15% gratuity, right?
I'm trying to think.
Um,
In the UK, that happens in the UK, but if it's a large group of people. Now, that I can
mhm,
kind of appreciate because, yeah, if you
mhm,
suddenly got a table of 10 or more people coming in, that's a lot of work. But normally, what they'll do in that situation is on the menu, it will
mhm.
say very clearly that groups of 8 plus, 10 plus, whatever it is, there is a 10% service charge. So you're aware of it when you are ordering. It's not something
Yeah.
that's a surprise that appears when the bill comes in the night, right?
Yeah, that just seems like the worst way to do it. We've already added this to your bill. Are you okay with it? And you have to say no.
I'm going to do an experiment this summer. If that happens, I am actually going to. I'm just interested to see. I mean, let's see if I'm brave enough to do it. I'm interested to see what the procedure will be to get it off the bill.
Hmm.
And obviously, it's not. I don't want to hurt some individual waiter or waitress because it's not their fault. It's company
Yeah.
policy. That's the problem. It's
That's
not them who
that's the
decides.
thing. That's the thing. I feel like because I've talked to a friend of mine who also lives in Japan. He comes to visit the States eventually, and I sort of railed at him one time about how like terrible tipping is, and he's like, "So you just don't pay any of these people any money at all?" And like they have to like struggle because it's inconvenient for you, and I'm just like, "No, I tip
Hmm.
what I consider to be a fairly high amount, and I tip all the time." And it's just to the point where I hate the fact that it's just accepted that this is how it works. I want it to be like when you go to Japan and the price is just baked into the food. And
Hmm.
not only that, but when you look at a menu item, it'll give you like big price that you look at will include tax as well. So you know exactly what you're paying for based off of what you're ordering off the menu. Like that's just the way it should work. That's just the way it should work.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like the thing is over here, like the again, it might be different in Japan and Spain and UK, but for example in the UK and in the US as well. But in the UK, there is a minimum wage by law.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if the minimum wage is not sufficient, that's not the fault of the consumer. That's the fault of the government for not having a high enough minimum wage.
Right.
Or again, if the company wants to pay more above that minimum wage, but they're in their legal right not to.
Yeah.
But then that's the fault.
The
Well,
sneaky thing.
the minimum
So,
wage is not
so
high enough.
yeah. So there is a minimum wage in the U.S. as well. It's also not high enough. There's two different minimum wages, if I understand this correctly. Fortunately, I haven't had to worry about this in my personal life in some time, but I think there's like state minimums and federal minimums, and
Right.
they're sort of two different standards. The really sneaky and sort of insidious to me thing about tips is restaurants can get away with paying below minimum wage with the understanding that people will make up for that based off of the tips that they get,
Oh, that's
which is
outrageous.
just I don't understand how that is possible. Like that just should not be something. And this is a political statement I'm making, and
Yeah.
it's one of the things that I personally feel fairly strongly about is that I think if there's a minimum wage, you should have to pay the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Like
That's what it's
and
called. Yeah.
yeah,
I
and
don't know.
I don't like tips to begin with, so I have very strong opinions on this particular matter.
Hmm.
Sorry everyone out there if I've just riled you up by my
Wow.
crazy conception of how things should work, but
Yeah.
I
That's the
just think
problem.
it's the only thing. I just think it's the only thing that makes sense is that you look at a bill, and
Yes.
for when you're out at a restaurant, and it gives you the cost of the food, and it includes the tax, and it includes whatever it should for the tips and the running of the restaurant and all of that, and you pay for that. That's
Yeah.
how it should work.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing where you're supposed to get by, kind of, but maybe, and cut all these corners, like I don't like it.
No. So, Beach, I've got like two follow-ups to that. So, first one would be I don't know how it works in the States. You can maybe correct me, but I'm more than sure in the UK. No, I'm certain in the UK that the employer has to pay a certain amount to the government based upon the wage that they pay to the workers. So it's like to
Hmm.
contribute towards pension costs and national insurance contributions,
Yep.
all that sort of thing. So surely, if that system exists in the States, then the restaurants are then, or anyone, or any company for that fact, who are not paying minimum wage, say, oh, because the customers will tip them to make up for it, then they are basically not paying. They're trying to do it as a tax loophole as well.
I'm not super well informed on that, but I would imagine that yes, that they're only going to be responsible for paying in based off of what their particular rate is.
Hmm.
But again, that's something that I haven't looked into, so I could be off base on that.
Sure. I'd say with me, I'm more than sure it's the case in the UK, but again, I could be wrong.
Yeah,
Again,
because
I
I
have a
know
lot of
there's a certain
working friends
amount.
in the UK.
I know there's a certain amount in the U.S. when you have a full-time job, they're going to take a certain amount for healthcare and a certain amount for Social Security, and
Yeah.
that is very clearly displayed when you get your paychecks and things.
Yeah, but that's fine. But the at least in the UK, the employee has deductions for certain taxes and and then student loan costs and all that sort of stuff. We don't have healthcare here because it's all public systems. We don't have that insurance cost, but we'll have deductions for taxes and all that sort of thing. But then there's also an employer's contribution.
Hmm.
So
That
that feels like to me
I
then
see.
that if that system does also exist, or even if it is in the UK, then by paying below minimum wage, you're also then not only making the employee suffer and making their wage more insecure, but then you're also then relinquishing, is that the word, on your tax obligations and all this sort of thing.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you correctly, which I might not be, what you're talking about sounds sort of like what we would call a 401k over here, where your people who are working full time, they're encouraged to pay into a fund to save up for their retirement,
Mm-hmm.
and the employer will match a certain amount of that contribution, and
Yeah.
usually that savings takes the form of some sort of stock. Um, I don't think employers are required to offer that for people who work in restaurants, like as
Mm,
servers. I could be wrong about that. I'm not. I did not come prepared with all the statistics I need, but it's my understanding that that doesn't happen. I know when I worked in a grocery store, I didn't get any sort of retirement savings plan of any kind through the employer. So
right.
at least back when I was working part time at a grocery store, they didn't have to do that.
Okay. Interesting. But again, it might be a different system. So yeah, and it
Yeah.
all depends on all the threshold that you have to work, or maybe age and all this sort of thing. Because again, there's complications in the UK too, because the minimum wage is different based upon your age. So maybe you might not hit certain thresholds and all that sort of thing. I generally don't know. Again, because I haven't worked much in the UK because I've been studying a lot and then I've moved to another country, and I haven't fully got my head around the Spanish system yet. But which I should really do, to be honest. But yeah, it's yeah. Well, that goes on to pet peeves, which is which we weren't expecting to do. But yeah,
True. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a political statement. There might be people who are just very, against what we're talking about. But yeah, if there's a minimum wage, you should respect that minimum wage. If that minimum wage is not sufficient to meet the needs of the population in terms of cost of living and all that sort of thing, then you're going to have to do something about that in terms of either minimum wage increases or, give more state welfare and all this or benefits or however you want to call it. You're going to have to do something. But
Yeah.
again, that's political. And then there'll be other people listening to us probably like, no, 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 that's not how the system works. It should be, um, so, you know.
Yeah. But I think that's fair. And tipping is definitely one of my pet peeves. That's one of the things that I had in mind. I have a personal grudge about the tipping system in the US. I think it's silly and we should get rid of it.
Right, especially the fact it's so compulsory, right? I mean, I don't tip
Yeah.
extremely often, but if
Hmm.
someone is being not just doing their normal job,
Hmm.
right? And I'm saying I know most waiters and waitresses have been really nice. I've got no complaints, but if someone's gone above and beyond, and
Mm.
we've had a really good sort of rapport with them during our time with the restaurant, then I will happily tip them. I've got no issue with it.
Hmm.
But I will make sure I'll try and do it in a way that the money definitely goes to them. Because
Hmm.
again, if it gets put through the company system, goodness knows where it ends up. Did it actually make it to the waiter or waitress, or does it end up in the company pot and then it goes? Who knows where
Yeah.
it ends up, right? But then,
Yeah, that's always something that I'm a little bit wary about is
yeah,
unfortunate aspect of because we went into lockdown and so all of the sort of tipping stuff got handled through company software and it's just like I don't know. I'd like to think this is going to benefit the person that actually gave me the service, but I don't know. And of
sure,
course, on the individual level, right? And this may vary from store to store. I've not worked a service job, but my understanding is that even people who get individual tips at a restaurant, it's not necessarily out of the ordinary for them to pool their tips and split it up in the states,
yeah,
just because of the way that it's expected to be making up for their wages.
sure, yeah, and they'll want to share it between them, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had something in mind, but then, yeah, I mean, I'm the same. If I want to go into a restaurant, I expect that the cost of the meal will be sufficient to pay for everything that the restaurant has to pay for. That includes wages. That's just my opinion.
Yep.
If you need to
Yep.
put up
I
your
agree.
prices, put up your prices. I mean, it's not ideal, and I realize they might lose business, but I'd rather have that than have this 10% extra charge just walloped on the end of my meal. So I'm gonna do an experiment over the summer. I'm gonna try and see what happens if I try to get it taken off
Hmm.
um, the bill. The other problem is now since COVID, I don't know what it's like in the US, but a lot of Europe has become very cashless. I was actually finding it really interesting earlier when you said that Japan's still very focused on hard money because I thought being so technologically sort of advanced, as we talked about in the previous episode with their amazing toilet system and all this sort of thing, I'd have thought they'd be very into electronic payments, whereas it seems to be the
Yeah. Well,
reverse.
that's sort of one of the contradictions about Japanese society. There are some ways in which it seems like it's super advanced from the future, and there are other ways in which it seems like it's stuck in the past and things haven't changed since like the 60s or something.
That's really
It's
interesting.
wild. absolutely wild to see the way that those two sides of Japan sort of interact.
Right.
And like I said, I think it had a similar effect. You were talking about how COVID has sort of pushed things cashless in Europe. I think it's had a similar effect in Japan. I haven't been back since the end of the pandemic, but up until the point where I stopped going, up until about 2019, it was still a very cash-based society.
Hmm.
So I'm going to be curious. I'm probably going back to Japan at some point in my life, and so I'm going to be curious to see when I do return, to what extent like cashless money systems have evolved.
Right. Right. Whereas the problem is now, I mean, I prefer to tip in cash, but the problem is I barely carry cash anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because I'm kind of between two countries, so when I go, to the UK, then I'm always using, cards with transferred money or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have cash on me. So then if somebody wanted to tip, and I'd be like, I've got 10 pence. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a bit awkward in that sense. So Emma, we're looking during the summer to be doing a little bit of traveling, and one of the countries we're going to go to. I can say it out loud now because obviously people aren't going to hear this until afterwards. Is we're going to go to Prague.
Ooh,
And
nice.
I've heard that it is still quite sort of cash, and they don't accept euros because even if it's inside the European Union, it's they have their own currency outside of the
Mm-hmm.
eurozone. So we're potentially gonna have to get cash out. It'll be interesting to see, how that society sort of functions, especially post COVID. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm having a look at the footage, and it is looped. It's just begun its loop again, so we're back in spring.
Okay.
um, so I
We
don't
made
know.
it.
Yeah, I don't know if we reached the end of that thread or not, but we might have to stop anyway. um, just so that people don't see me uh, in the rain all over again, harvesting my last of the spring crops.
Yeah.
Um,
I will say, just to sort of bring this back to the whole like eating out versus cooking in Japan versus the States and things like that.
sure.
Um, that the one aspect of living in Japan and eating out that's very big in the culture in general is going out to these like little bars and restaurants. They call them izakaya, sort of like pubs, I guess. Although as an American, I feel like I don't fully understand the cultural impact of a pub in the UK. Um,
Add it
but
to the list.
yeah. Um, but that is another like major aspect of eating out in Japan is going out to a bar. And that's something that I don't have a huge amount of experience with because I don't drink alcohol. So
Mhm.
sorry anyone who's looking for like enlightenment on that sort of side of eating out and having fun in Japan. I don't have a huge wealth of experience to share with you on that subject.
I'm the same. There is a certain culture in Spain in terms of going out to drink and also eat. I can very quickly touch on it, even though I don't drink, so I haven't experienced it personally. But there's compared to the UK, there is a much healthier sort of attitude to alcohol here. I mean, again, I'm generalizing. There are
Hmm.
people who have unhealthy, like in all societies, unhealthy obsession with alcohol, but
Yeah.
or an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, let's say, independence on it. But in
Hmm.
general, here compared to the UK, um, drinking definitely seems to be more about the socializing aspect rather than just drinking, and also that it's drinking and eating together. There will be people, obviously, who will go out just to drink and nothing else, especially young people. It's student parties and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
you see it all the time. When I'm walking home, not so much now because we've moved, so I haven't seen it so much. But when I used to live in a different flat, I used to walk home every single night around 9, 9:30 at night, going towards 10 o'clock, and all the bars that when I say bars, they are like these sort of cafe bar types where you got then all the people sitting in the street
Hmm.
drinking, with their beer or their wine or whatever. But they also have a little bit of food with it. So the tradition here is a thing called the tappa, which is like the little bit of food that comes with the drink. Some, especially back before the economic crisis in Europe in 2008, a lot of the bars would give you that little bit of food for free.
Oh,
It would just be
nice.
something small like maybe like a little bit of, omelette or a little bit of olives or something, or maybe there's a thing called patatas bravas, which is like fried potatoes. There'll be something like that. Now, normally you have to pay a little bit more for it, but some still often give free olives, right? But there's this sort of thing where you go to the bar, you have maybe one or two drinks, and then you go home, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that can happen almost every single night. Spanish people are incredibly social. Again, I'm generalizing, but in general, Spanish people are very sociable. They like to go out, so the lockdown restrictions was very hard for them. But it's a case of
Mm-hmm.
they don't overdo it, but they go out almost every night. Again, generalizing, but the bars are always full almost every evening.
Mm-hmm.
More so the weekend for obvious reasons, but it's not unusual on a Tuesday night to go past a bar and it'll be full of people. But they'll have
Mm-hmm.
a couple of drinks and then they'll go off home to have dinner because dinner's very late. This is something else we should talk about in terms of like timetable of the day. Spanish
Oh yeah.
timetable is shifted incredibly late compared to the UK
Mm-hmm.
and I guess in the US. I don't know how it works in Japan, but this is something we can talk about in more detail in another podcast. But yeah, they'll have a couple of drinks and then they'll go home to have dinner. Um, but it's not like the British way of doing it, where they almost abstain from alcohol for the whole week, and then Friday and
Mm-hmm.
Saturday they drink a lot.
Hmm.
It's a very different kind of relationship with alcohol. Spanish people in general don't drink to excess.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much healthier relationship with alcohol, which I, as a teetotaler, I appreciate. Right? There's nothing
Yeah.
worse than me when I go out with British friends, and they're like, "Oh, let's go to a pub." I'm like, "Oh, damn," 'cause I know what's gonna happen. They're just gonna drink, 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 and I'm then
Mm-hmm.
the only sober person at the table.
Yep.
And it's not fun being a sober person where everybody around you is just increasingly more drunk.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
I don't socialize in that way. When I know that
Mm-hmm.
all my friends are off to the pub, I'm like, off you go. You all go and have fun. I'll catch you in the morning, kind of thing. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not. I will socialize if they're gonna drink, but there's food involved. No problem. I'm on board with it. But in terms of just drink and only drink, nah, that's just not. I can't cope with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one
I,
of the differences. The way that people eat out and also drink out in Spain is different.
Yeah, I'm in a similar position in terms of, yeah, if they're gonna go out and have a couple of drinks and have some food, right? I'm okay socializing in that situation. If the whole point is just to go out and just drink, like, I don't belong there.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It gets worse the night goes on, right?
Yeah.
Unless you've gone with the specific person, I'm gonna look after somebody and I'll make sure they get
Hmm.
home. But otherwise, it's not.
Right. This is something, okay, I realize we're already over time, but I did want to bring this up because I thought this was an interesting bit of a culture clash within Japan.
Hmm.
Because when I was staying in Hachinohe, I have another friend who lives in Tokyo, and in Hachinohe, there's a bus system for public transit, but it sort of shuts down. I think the last bus usually is done by like 8 or 9 p.m. Maybe there might be one that's a little bit later than that if you're downtown and looking to go towards one of the bus stations that's kind of further out on the edge of the city. Um, as a last way home after 10, but that's sort of rare. And so if people want to stay out and drink, and I mean, yeah, Tokyo has a last train as well, but the last train is usually after midnight, and the trains start running again at like 4:35 in the morning, something like that. Um, so in Hachinohe, you have a much greater chance that if you're going to stay out late drinking, you're not going to have access to public transit. So what happened in Hachinohe's case is they started offering these services. These taxi companies started offering what they call daiko services. Daiko meaning like representative, and it's because they like take your place. So in order to keep you from drinking and driving, you can call this taxi company, and they'll show up with these two guys in the taxi, and one person will go and they'll drive your car, and the other person you get to take the place of that person in the taxi, and they drive your car home as they're driving you home, and it's a way to get you in your car home after you've been drinking.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
I described the system one time to another friend of mine when I was on this mutual trip where me, my friend in Japan, and my friend from home were all going around Japan. And I described it to this guy who was visiting, and the guy who lived in Tokyo looked at me and was like, "Are you crazy? That's it. That system sounds like it's rife for like abuse. They're going to steal your car." And I was
Well, I
just
was going to
like,
say, if that happened in the UK, yeah, nobody get their car back.
"Yeah." And I was like, "Well, they do it in Hachinohe. I don't know what to tell you."
That's cool.
So
I bet, yeah,
yeah, I
obviously,
was
I can't imagine it being the cheapest service since you're having to pay for two people's time, but then much safer
no,
than you trying to drive home by yourself, right? It's
yes,
yeah, I think that's a really good. I mean, again, depending where you live here, a lot of people here always take inside their mobile phone case. They got like the mobile phone, and they got like a little like plastic protection that they'll go around it. Most
mm-hmm,
people will have a 10 or maybe probably a 20 euro note or a little bit
mm-hmm,
more than that inside in between the phone and the case. So then,
yep,
just in case they end up in a situation where if they they have been out or they've lost their wallet or something, they can just easily take a taxi back home. So it just
mm-hmm,
avoids all that issue of having to try to drive and all this sort of thing. Because I mean, you hear it all the time, and it's something when cause I've just done recently done the theory test for driving, and
mm-hmm,
there's so many questions in the test about the effects of alcohol when you're driving and stuff because they want to try and reduce drunk driving to the limit, to the lowest
mm-hmm.
possible limit. But then there's always going to be people who do it, and it's just it's very dangerous. Not only for the driver, but then you can have innocent people caught up in it as well. So yeah, if you have any sort of system like that where
Mm-hmm.
there's a very easy way to get around that problem, then so much the better. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always thought that was great. And it really surprised me when I was like, "Oh, they have this great system." And my other friend who lived in Japan was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, I guess they don't do that in Tokyo."
No, so if it's a smaller community that you're living in, yeah, there'll be a lot,
Hmm.
there'll be more trust between people. But then we talked about before how Japan in general is quite a trusting sort of society and things. So it's probably the
Right.
best place to have that sort of system. Yeah,
Hmm.
very good. I don't know if we fully covered all those main topics, but we did some. We can easily
Yeah, we jumped around. Yeah.
yeah, we did jump around, but that's kind of nice.
Hmm.
So yeah, we'll have to we'll have to go through ourselves. We got plenty of time now until the next podcast. In terms of the
Yep.
viewers, it
We
will be
can.
maybe a couple of weeks or a month or so after this one comes out, a month at the most. But we'll have to go through during the summer and try and work out what we covered and what we need to keep adding to.
That's
As long
right.
as you don't wake up in a cold sweat at 2 a.m. start sending me
Yep.
frantic messages going, "We didn't talk about this."
Yeah.
Just add it to the list.
Hopefully, hopefully that doesn't happen this time. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these things that we've just recorded in absolute silence with zero feedback
Yeah,
get received,
get
and whether or
received
not
is.
people are interested in having me back, or if they're like, I've had enough of this guy,
I'm sure not. The
or
conversation has been incredibly interesting. It's nice to have, another person to bounce off in terms of
yeah,
ideas and things. And also, then we've had similar experiences, but we come at it at very different angles because the countries we visited have been so different. So yeah.
yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think I said this in the last one. It's just I have a hard time imagining other people listening to this for 2.5 hours, but we'll see.
Well, we'll
We'll
see.
see how it goes, and we'll be able to take stock and better respond to feedback and things in the next one. So no matter
Yeah,
what, we'll have a little bit of time to reflect.
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, we'll call it for now, but we'll be back again very soon for another one. Thank you everybody who's watched this or listened to this. If it's kept you company, then it's done its job. So I hope you've enjoyed our wee chats over the last 4 episodes, I think it is now. And yeah, I said it at the beginning of the podcast. If for some reason if the viewers rebel and they don't want you back, then I think I'm just gonna have to just despite that just keep having chats with you.
Yeah, we'll have
Weekly
to we'll
chats
have
with
to
you.
add it to like a weekly routine of some kind. Yeah, because this is just
Absolutely.
a blast.
And I do generally mean this. I'm going to miss talking to you over the next couple of months. It's going to be very weird not being able to chat with you and just keep talking about cultural stuff. We'll just end up just adding loads of stuff
Likewise,
onto the list as we go through.
undoubtedly.
It's been really good fun. And thank you very much again for being willing to do this as well. I realize you're giving up a lot of your time to do it, and you're busy enough as it is with translation born and job and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I do appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. Like I said, it's always a pleasure for me to have these conversations, and whether or not it continues in podcast form, we got to find a way to keep this going.
Absolutely.
And I hope you have a great time over your summer break. And hey, you could do some involuntary research.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
gonna be going
Yeah,
back
you never
anyway.
know. If there's any culture shocks anywhere else I go, I will add them to the list and we can talk about them.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, so for people who don't know, yeah, my summer is just since we spend our life living in Spain, then for the time off when we're off work, then we have to go back to my homeland and to see folk, and also we're recently married, so honeymoon is very much on the cards and all that sort of stuff. So just enjoying the downtime from work as much as possible. But yeah, it's gonna be very weird being away from recording, but yeah, I'll be back in September, and refreshed, and we'll see what the rest of the year holds. But yeah, you too. I hope you have an amazing summer.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch off the podcast, but yeah, all the best. And yeah, thank you everybody who's watching. And yeah, I hope everyone's had a great summer. Obviously, you're seeing this in September, so the summer's already passed for you. So I hope you've
That's
had a
true.
great summer. And I hope everything's going well. But if you're having a bit of a difficult time, hopefully it gets better soon. Hopefully this podcast has kept you company a little bit. And yeah, we'll see you in another one very soon, folks. Take care. Thank you very much for listening and watching. And sorry for the audio issues. Just classic technology not cooperating.
Classic. Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
everybody. Bye, everyone.